Chapter 61. Meeting the Hunter. Shirakuro crouched on the roof of the tallest building in Hosu, scanning the streets below with the help of the zoom quirk. He was taking the chance to practice stabilizing his sights to effectively use the vision quirk, despite the slight nausea of adding a new quirk. The sleep-deprived was truly wonderful. The sun had been down for a good while already, but Shirakuro still felt fresh as in the morning. The quirk had even taken away tiredness he had accumulated during the day before getting it, and it was effortless to use. The quirk was nearly automatic. He could choose to not use it, but it was easier not to. No wonder the previous owner ended up overusing it. Feeling like this, it was easy to forget there was even such a thing as need for sleep. The effect was similar to almost forgetting permanence of serious injuries on other people when he had regeneration. If Izuku didn't worry about those around him, so much he might have forgotten that altogether. He blinked and zoomed out before zooming in again on a different place. That was easier than trying to move the spot he was looking at any significant distance while zoomed in. A group of heroes got out of a car in a nearby parking lot and scattered in different directions, some alone, some in pairs. One flew up over the rooftops, causing Shirakuro to duck, but she headed in another direction, leaving rest of the group and Shirakuro behind. He reminded himself to not make the mistake of forgetting to look up as most people do. He still had to check the people below. Doing his best to check each of them, none raised any special familiarity or interest from his research, except he turned back to one of the heroes, referencing his memories of the heroes in the area. When the man stepped straight under a streetlight, it clicked. "Manual," he muttered under his helmet. "Do you wish something?" Kurojiri asked behind him. "I'm going to follow a hero. Let's go to that roof." He pointed at a building down the street. He would have rather stretched his legs and trained with his jets leaping from building to building, but no one could see Shirakuro using that quirk. Also, his control was still limited. He could leap fine but relied solely on his agility to avoid a need for regeneration with any significant height or distance. Instead, he hopped on a little warp gate that looked like a dark puddle on the roof, a puddle with a whirlpool. He landed on the other roof, and after a few seconds of reorienting rushed to the edge. He was now ahead of Manuel, who was walking towards him. Shirakuro continued following him, switching between watching him and scanning the surrounding roofs. Mostly the hero just walked around and waved to people that did so to him first. Shirakuro started mentally counting what share of people did so, trying to estimate how these people felt about the man. Not that it would describe his true personality. Shirakuro often scanned the alley's Manual past in case of familiar faces. He eventually spotted one, but it wasn't one of the ones he was looking. This one made him frown under his helmet. Manual stopped to chat with Native. They seemed to be friendly. Tenya's chosen internship hero was looking worse moment by moment. They walked together a moment, but a few blocks later stopped by a crossroads, raising their hands in goodbye. Shirakuro froze still for a moment, his eyes darting between the two to the best of his ability at such zoom level. Part of Izuku wanted to keep an eye on Manual to learn everything he could about the man, but that wasn't Shirakuro's mission here. He leaped between adjacent buildings of the same height to follow Native, the so-called hero he at least knew to be rotten, and with at least some people aware of it. If he wanted to discover Stain, he couldn't afford to track every hero individually, hoping they were also rotten in the eyes of the killer. The so-called hero, like most, didn't look up even as Shirakuro was directly above him, and he was alone despite the recent appearance of the hero killer. Such arrogance was nothing new among heroes, though. If Shirakuro wanted to kill the man, he felt he would have had a very good chance despite Native being pro, even more so if he could have used Izuku's quirks and blasted the man from above. With so many witnesses around on the street, there wasn't even the chance to risk doing so in secret, and that was most important. Shirakuro had even added protection in his gloves and sleeves between the hands and elbows to compensate for lack of dragon blade for defense. They were inspired by Hitoshi's arm guards, but much more hidden in the sleeves. Unfortunately, killing the hero would not have solved anything. Native would just have been shown as a martyr and added to the list of dead heroes that mostly consisted of Stain's victims. It would have been yet another hero who did as he pleased and got away with a clean image. Shirakuro forced himself to look away and up, to check nearby roofs again. He focused on one nearby roof in sight of the hero. There was a potentially human-sized form on it. Shirakuro wasn't sure if it had just arrived, or if he had not noticed it before. The only reason he did now was because the wind had picked up, blowing around some long strands of fabric or something similar hanging from the form. "Kurogiri, rooftop at 10 o'clock, Shirakuro said, and waited a few seconds, during which the form moved away from the edge and out of sight. "I saw it. Do you wish to go to that roof?" Shirakuro paused as his thoughts caught up to his mouth. "No, the one next to it that is one story taller, and keep out of sight once I'm there." Quietly, a warp gate formed in the air in front of Shirakuro, and he dove through. His feet touched the surface of the other roof without a sound. He crouched down before the second foot even touched the roof and rushed to the edge to look down onto the other roof below. This time he relied on his helmet's night vision rather than his quirks, though a night vision or infrared vision quirk would have been handy. Even more so considering even with the helmet's optics there was no sign of anyone on the roof. Shirakuro snuck alongside the roof's edge, scanning every millimeter of the roof and those around it. With the warp gate, it had only been seconds from seeing the other person to Shirakuro getting here. He couldn't have gone far, but there was no one in sight, and the only sounds came from traffic far below and the blowing of wind that was just calming down. Soon there was just a slight whistle of air moving and a tap of something soft. The whistle of air got higher, like something was moving through it rapidly. Shirakuro leaned back and down so deep he had to catch himself with his hand as a blade of a sword whizzed through where his neck had been a fraction of a second earlier. He pushed with both his leg and arm to kick at his attacker and immediately flip up. The attacker avoided, but it gave Shirakuro enough time to get on his feet and raise his arm. The sword swung at him again. It impacted his forearm with enough force to even bend the arm guard, causing a small slice to press painfully against his skin. The force of the slash alone might have thrown Shirakuro out of balance had Izuku not regularly taken punches from a walking boulder and occasional rocket-powered kicks. Still, Shirakuro parried the slash and jumped several steps backwards, dodging a second strike. The attacker didn't immediately charge at him, giving Shirakuro the chance to finally really see his opponent. It was a tall, muscular man with a dark sleeveless shirt and some kind of bandages wrapped around his arms. The waving fabric Shirakuro had seen were long ends of a scarf and a fabric mask covering the top of the man's face above. The man had no nose. Also, his strangely elongated tongue hung out of his mouth. The minor mutation had to have something to do with his quirk. He raised the sword, pointing it at Shirakuro, who was glad the mask covered his face. He tugged on the calm mind to remain focused and keep his feelings away from his voice. "You are Stain. And you were looking for me, hero." "I was, but I—" Shirakuro started, but Stain's arm twitched. In a fraction of a second, a knife appeared in his hand and got thrown towards Shirakuro. It was slower than some of his father's air cannon blasts, but Shirakuro barely avoided it, by which time Stain was already on the move. Shirakuro stepped aside from the slash and struck out towards Stain's arm with an open hand vibration already active. He only barely brushed the sword's handle. Enough of a shockwave passed through the handle to make Stain drop it. The long sword hadn't even touched the roof as Stain swung a smaller, but more gruesome-looking blade. Shirakuro tried to pull back in time, but the blade still grazed his arm, finding the gap between the arm guard and reinforcements in his gloves. Shirakuro hissed once as he backed away, but the injury was nothing. The small wound made moving his hand properly more difficult, but would not have taken him out of the fight even if it wasn't already healing. Stain didn't chase after him. The sword clanged once against the roof and bounced a little bit. Stain caught it before it could hit the roof again. He grinned. It wasn't a happy grin, but rather a deranged grin of a sociopath looking at a helpless prey. Like Bakugo, but maybe even a magnitude worse. He licked his lips, raising the small blade in front of his face. Shirakuro felt death peeking over his shoulder. Stain was planning something. He hadn't even shown his quirk yet. Shirakuro couldn't leave initiative to the killer anymore and charged. Venomous nails extended through holes in his gloves. Then Stain licked the blade. Shirakuro lost all feeling in his limbs and fell forward with the momentum of his own attack. Without the helmet, he would have broken his nose at the very least. At least the paralysis didn't come with agonizing pain. He tried to tense all of his muscles, but could barely control his eyes and mouth. Was this Stain's quirk, or did his blades have venom? No, the effect was too sudden, and it happened when Stade had licked the blade. Shirakuro realized it had to have something to do with his blood, but that didn't tell him how the paralysis happened or how to break it. Was it telepathic, a matter of willpower, something blocking his nerve cells from passing signals from his brain to the muscles and back? The lack of feeling suggested so, but then what did blood have to do with it? How long did the effect last, and would his blood type influence that? Did it count as an injury he could heal from like venoms and poisons did? A pair of still working feet stood next to his head. Thinking time was over. You are fast and skilled, I acknowledge that, but your fighting is still unrefined. With a little more time you could have been a worthy foe, but it won't save you from being purged like all fake heroes. I am not a hero, Shirakuro managed to finally say. I tried to tell you. I just followed one who I know is rotten to find you. I'm not here to catch you. Stain crouched over him. He was so close. If Shirakuro could only have moved. His brain kept sending orders to his muscles, but they did nothing. Then why were you looking for me? Answer carefully. You will be judged for it. I want to know why you do, what you believe about heroes, but I was also asked to find you. Tamura Shigaraki from the League of Villains wants to meet you. Why would I want to meet him? Does he have any worthy conviction to support? Shirakuro could not give an honest answer the killer would like, and lying could return to haunt him and Tamura once Stain met him. I doubt my words would convince you of that. But you would consider him worth following, considering you are here? That was the question Shirakuro feared. He drew more on the calm mind, nearly forgetting his paraplegic state. I don't work for him. We don't get along that well, he paused. I was told to find you by our sensei. My name is Shirakuro Shigaraki. So, another Shigaraki. Then tell me, what is your conviction? What reason would I have to spare your life? The sword's tip hovered over the roof right next to Shirakuro's head and neck. He still could not move, and had to control fear to maintain at least the appearance of calmness. As long as he was helpless, he had to convince the killer, and being a scared kid was not going to help. I think our convictions are similar, but we disagree on what to do about it, he said. You hate heroes, probably not the concept of one, but the reality of too many of the heroes in the current system, whatever your standards for a real hero are. And if this is my conviction, you say you share it? You also think the fake heroes should be purged? Now is the real do or die moment. Not the way you think. Heroes are full of selfish, bigoted, and evil people, and most people either don't see or don't care about it. But simply going around killing them won't help. If anything, it might make things worse. The sword twitched next to his head, but now wasn't the time to stop. Shirakuro had lost the initiative in the fight. He could not afford the same in the talk. I can understand the feeling of wanting some of them be gone, even the desire to kill them, but that is like treating a wound by wiping blood off the floor. The problem with heroes and the whole hero system isn't with individual bad heroes. Stain crouched and brought his face closer. Then what is it with? It is with the whole system, and how people value quirks and people based on their power. If you have a flashy, physically powerful quirk, people believe you will become a hero, or at least successful from a young age. They favor you with support others don't receive and raise you to believe quirks determine people's worth, and that your quirk alone will make you successful. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the people picking who get to be heroes were raised in the same way with the same beliefs. In the end, we get a large share of heroes raised to believe in their own superiority by birth, with all kinds of selfish motives and no judgment of their character. Even if they don't want to be rich and famous, they want to be the best for their own ego's sake, not to help others, and when picking their predecessors never even give a chance to kids they don't believe in from the start, based mostly on their quirk. So why shouldn't I kill all the fake heroes? Because you cannot kill all of them, and even if you could, you are only making them into martyrs. They will be remembered as great heroes who died supposedly trying to save people from a serial killer. Another person with the same beliefs will take their place, and nothing will change, except the survivors might get more extreme after so much death. They will have received the fate they deserve, and a real hero might take their place. You clearly don't have the conviction to do what is needed. Stain stood up and the tip of his sword disappeared from Shirakuro's view. Shirakuro started again to internally yell at his body to move. His toe twitched. His fingernails grew out of his gloves. You have potential and might not be completely blind to the wrongs of this world. Perhaps one day you will also gain the will to do what is needed. Don't, Shirakuro gasped, go anywhere. His arm finally moved and struck forward at Stain's leg. The man's spiky boots were tall, so he had to reach upwards towards the back of his knee. Stain reacted fast, but not fast enough. The nails stabbed into the thick-feeling fabric for just an instant before Stain's leg moved away, then came back down on Shirakuro's hand. Shirakuro grunted as his hand got crushed between the boot and the roof. I gave you the chance. Seems you aren't even as smart as I, though. What is this? The pressure on Shirakuro's hand lessened as Stain staggered back and fell on his knees, shaking. Somehow, he had so far managed to avoid falling down completely from the paralysis. Shirakuro got up on one knee, finally able to move again. He laid the broken hand on his other knee as it healed, a bent finger snapping back into place. This, Stain gasped, is not the same quirk as before. His eyes moved to Shirakuro's hand as Shirakuro flexed his now-healed fingers to make sure everything worked. What are you? Someone who has been given many gifts. As I said, I do not work for Tamura, and I'm not like him either, in more ways than one. Not like almost anyone else, really. He paused to look over the shaking murderer in front of him. The venom's effect might not have been as complete as it had been on Izuku what seemed to have been so long ago, but at least for a moment, the killer was helpless. If he died now, or just got hurt too badly to do anything for a few weeks, there wouldn't even be the risk of Tenya running into him. Despite all his fears, Izuku had not been this close, this eager to take a life since his last fight with Bakugo. Shirakuro stopped fully holding back the killing intent quirk, allowing his feelings to mix with the quirk. What effect the quirk had on the killer was hard to say as he was already shaking on his knees. But Izuku hesitated. Despite all of the dark feelings, Shirakuro did not move. He had a mission, and he was curious. He wasn't here to do the hero's job. Even if Shirakuro didn't go out of his way to assassinate scum like Native, he wasn't about to protect one from Stain either. He sighed and pushed the killing intent quirk back into its box deep within. The venom won't last forever, but perhaps you are more willing to talk now. I won't try to kill you. Hopefully you return the favor once you can move. Stain, still shaking, but not making a sound despite the pain, grinned. You are a strange person. Fine. Neither of us shall die here tonight. I will not promise more. What is it you want to say to defend these fake heroes? Nothing. I want to say I agree with you that many heroes and the system that put them in that place is rotten. Not sure if we agree on details of what counts as rotten. One thing we do not agree on is going on a killing spree. You need to do much more to really change anything. At the very least, the rot should be exposed. If enough people learn the truth of enough heroes, they might start asking questions. You think we are going to suddenly have real heroes if people start asking questions? Shirakuro shook his head and spoke more quietly. No, at least not suddenly, but it is the only way. The system won't change if its flaws are not exposed, and the rotten people the system supports won't go anywhere until the whole thing changes. Also, he paused, there are still some real heroes. They just need the opportunities to show it. If you are a simple killer, you might not care about it. But if you really do it because of the flaws you see, then you should also consider how to have them replaced by someone better. Seems like that should be at least half of your conviction. And you think you can do this? I can try. I think I can at least achieve more than your killing spree does, if I can expose the actions of the heroes you would only kill. And the Shigaraki you want me to meet? His methods are more similar to yours, and you might be able to help each other in your goals, but I am not convinced you would find common ground in your convictions. You are not trying very hard to be convincing. If I trick you to come with lies, the chances of finding agreement, however low they might be now, will be lost as soon as you meet the truth. Interesting, Stain said and jolted a bit. He started pushing himself up. His movements were still shaky, and he was gritting his teeth from the effects of the venom, but he was moving. How are you moving? If you are still feeling pain, it should be paralyzing you. Those who would allow pain to paralyze themselves will not survive in the shadows of this world, Stain said, his voice strained from the effort. You are different from most that lurk in them, at least from most of those who have what it takes to survive. Shirakuro was already back on his feet and a few steps back from the killer, nails extended again. He remained quiet, observing every tiny motion of the man in front of him. That was until the stare broke through even calm mind to make Shirakuro's inside squeeze like the killing intent had been turned around against himself. He remained still. If you think you can talk me out of my mission, you are mistaken, but I can meet the other Shigaraki with one condition. What is your condition? You. Me. Yes, you. I want you to meet me again. You might lack the will to go far enough, or maybe not. I want to learn more and... He raised his sword he had somehow kept a hold of even while under the venom's influence. I want you to face me again. I want to see the potential I can feel but have yet to witness, even if I have to force it out of you. If you accept this, I will meet the other Shigaraki after a few meetings with you. Assuming you aren't afraid, and survive. There is no point in fighting or training if I hold back. Shirakuro was still processing what he had heard. Had this killer, a killer who had killed dozens of heroes seemingly with nothing but swords and a quirk that only worked after his opponent bled, had he just offered to train Shirakuro? The man put his sword away with a swing nearly as fast as his attacks. He shifted his weight between his legs, about to move, perhaps leave. I'm not afraid, Shirakuro said, raising the hand Stain had stepped on and flexed the completely uninjured fingers. He pulled his sleeve back enough to demonstrate the cut had already healed. You can't do anything to me that the Nomu I usually train with haven't already done. I'm sure you have heard about the Nomu by now, after the USJ? I have. What is your answer? I am not going to talk all night. I agree to your condition. Sounds interesting, but I expect you to fulfill your side of the bargain soon. Tamura is not a patient person. Stain huffed in disgust and turned away. Then you better be worth meeting him. He stepped to the edge. Shirakuro walked closer. Needless to say, you should not talk about anything you've learned to anyone, he warned. The same applies to you. I have no tolerance to anyone who would help the fake heroes. Come to this roof tomorrow at midnight, and make sure you are rested, Stain replied. Don't worry about that, Shirakuro smirked under his helmet. Then Stain jumped over the edge. Shirakuro waited for a few seconds, and then strolled to look over it, not surprised when he saw no sign of the man. He drew a deep breath, then another faster, and turned around to face the comforting dark form of Mist. Time to leave, was all he needed to say before a warp gate opened, and he rushed through into the safe solitude of a dark but familiar training room. Shirakuro rushed to a bench on the edge of the room and fell on it. He leaned his elbows on his knees and head on his hands as he began to unwind from the meeting. All of the quirk-covered tension crept up on him. He had met Stain, the real Stain. He had fought the killer. He had had the opportunity to end the killer. Shirakuro knew what he did was the only right choice he could make to complete his mission and learn about someone who saw the same-ish issues he did and actually did something about it, however misguided and brutally he went about it. The helmet around Shirakuro's head started feeling tighter and more oppressing as he gasped for air through its filters. He grabbed the latches holding the helmet in place and started yanking them until he managed to take the helmet off and drop it on the bench next to him. One different choice and Izuku would not have needed to worry about Tenya chasing after a serial killer, the serial killer that had already devastated him and his family even if Tensei was still alive. Shirakuro couldn't just ask Stain to leave a specific student alone if they ever ran into each other. Izuku put his hand on his face to hide the tears that leaked out. The room felt cold on top of being dark and empty, except for Kirojiri, but he remained standing a step away. Someone might have called it a respectful distance, but it felt more like a wide ravine separating them. The watchful gaze of Kirojiri felt safe, but the Nomu's silent guard lacked the feelings and close warmth Izuku needed at the moment, and he didn't have his usual shoulders to lean on, not for Shirakuro's issues. Izuku gestured the walking mist cloud to come closer and leaned against the comforting darkness. Thinner mist flowed off the Nomu, completely covering Izuku. It helped a bit with his getting back control of himself without relying on quirks. It would take time, but he had time. It wasn't like he was going to sleep tonight. Chapter 62. Learning from a Killer. Izuku pulled Shirakuro's jacket on and picked yet new arm guards. They had been his first idea to replace the dragon blade shield for Shirakuro, but he had opted to go with the lighter and more hidden ones under the sleeves. That was before it barely held up against a single slash of a sword, pressing painfully on his arm until he had changed clothes. Adding an extra layer on top of that was worth the wait for what he was about to do. He'd rather not leave an arm behind, even if it would regrow, and the weight would improve his training. Izuku could imagine Ijiro declaring that loudly right before asking if he could get something like them but heavier. Izuku huffed with a smile. Perhaps he could get arm weights for each of them. The smile lasted until he took Shirakuro's helmet. The black wall descended between him and the world. Shirakuro looked at everything through the tint of lenses and optics. The image was at least as sharp as with bare eyes, but more distant, like he was observing things through a window. Perhaps that was easier. He stepped up to Kurogiri. "I am ready. I shall send you where you requested," Kurogiri said. "Be careful, young Shigaraki," and the Nomu was suddenly quiet. The mist around his head twisted and twirled. "What?" Shirakuro asked. "Do not forget who you are." Shirakuro looked at the Nomu for a long, quiet moment. "Maybe," Shirakuro said quietly, "once I figure it out myself." The Nomu did not comment anymore and opened the warp gate. As Shirakuro stepped through, he once again found himself alone on a roof, but not the one he had met Stain on the previous night. This time he immediately dropped to a low crouch, hiding behind the edge of the roof as he peeked over it to observe the roof where he was supposed to meet the killer. What if Izuku had sneaked out to Hosu alone, worried for Tenya, and blasted the hero killer with the advantage of surprise? That could still be an option. Risky, but he only needed one hit and to change clothes quickly. Shirakuro shook his head to clear his thoughts. That was Izuku talking, and the half of Izuku he was afraid of. Shirakuro could not afford to let that distract himself from his mission. There was too much to learn to let that get in the way. The clock was past midnight, and the nearby roof below was still empty. Was Stain even coming? Shirakuro started scanning the surrounding roofs. Perhaps the killer was being careful like him, but something felt strange. He had a strange tingling. Was he being watched? Shirakuro stopped breathing for a few seconds, leaving nothing to disrupt his senses. The feeling got stronger. What was it? Fabric chafed against itself somewhere. Steel whistled through the air. Shirakuro snapped to the side, leaning and crouching just enough for the knife to fly past. Shirakuro's eyes widened as the image of the flying knife got seared into his eyes. He spun around, arm up, ready to block a sword strike. But one did not come. Stain stood a few meters away, frowning. "I like that knife," Stain said as there was a high-pitched cling somewhere behind Shirakuro. "Then why did you throw it?" Shirakuro responded, struggling to keep his voice calm. "Did you ask me back here just to kill? Try to kill me?" "No, I asked you to that roof," Stain pointed behind Shirakuro. "And if you were as capable as I hoped, you would have the knife now. I did not throw it that fast. You won't survive long like this, even with your quirks." He pulled out another knife. Shirakuro tensed, but the killer flipped it around, holding the blade and offering it to Shirakuro, who accepted it carefully. Stain turned around and walked towards the opposite side of the roof. He spoke as he walked. "Throw it." Shirakuro looked at the blade. "At you?" "Throw it," Stain commanded harsher. Shirakuro held the blade like he remembered seeing online somewhere. Throwing knives was one thing that had not been a part of his battle training. He compensated by swinging his arm harder. The blade left his fingers at an angle, and he could immediately see it was not going to hit Stain. He was not sure if he was relieved for that or not. Stain spun to the side, and his arm swung out even faster than Shirakuro's when he had thrown the knife. His fingers closed around the handle before it could fly past, stopping the weapon instantly. He spun around, arm raised, ready to throw the weapon back. It was enough to make Shirakuro flinch, but Stain stopped mid-motion and slowly lowered his arm. "I suspected before. You have not been doing this for long." They stared at each other for a few seconds. "I won't give you any information that easily," Shirakuro said. "You don't need to. I can tell you are young and how you move in battle shows and experience." You have more skill than you should have, but some things only change after enough real battles. No amount of training, quirks, or other changes can hide that. Shirakuro relaxed, just a little bit, as the killer was talking seemingly calm. Muscles in Stain's arm tensed. The arm wasn't hanging relaxed anymore. Shirakuro jolted to the side, this time raising his arm. The knife flew into his arm guard with a clang. It was a miracle Shirakuro had not activated Dragon Blade as a shield, but at least the weight reminding him not to had done its job. It also slowed him down a bit as he scrambled to catch the knife that spun into the air from impact. He caught it just in time before it hit the floor. Perhaps it wasn't the best idea to try new equipment for the first time when facing a serial killer. At least he managed to do it all without looking away from the killer. At least you did not lose this one. Shirakuro almost spoke, but paused to listen. I did not lose anything. He held his free hand next to himself half closed like he was about to grab something. A tiny warp gate appeared over the hand, and the first knife dropped down handle first. Shirakuro's hand closed around it, and now he was dual-wielding. At least it felt a little familiar, even if the blades weren't on fire. Holding the weapons in his hand was nevertheless a bit awkward, and Stain's stare did not help with that. Him pulling out a katana wasn't any more helpful. Show me something interesting, Shigaraki. Show me what you can do without relying on quirks. Relying on them will hold back your skills. Those are your only true chance to survive. The boot camp serial killer was about to start. So, this was how Hitoshi felt when coming to Izuku's place, minus the serial killer of course. Izuku was just a one-time killer, for now. Stain charged. Shirakuro didn't want to repeat the previous night's mistakes by giving the killer initiative, so he also attacked. He dodged and blocked the first 3 attacks, not being any more successful with his own, but then his attempt at blocking led to a katana blade sliding into the crook of his elbow. Even though the fabric itself was protective, the strike stung and Shirakuro could feel warm wetness against his arm. Stain pulled the blade back and looked at it, licking his lips. You are lucky I held back, or I would have taken your arm. Yeah, well, Shirakuro said, you wouldn't be the first one to do that. Some of my training opponents could pulverize both our bones if they didn't hold back. You will never achieve your full potential by only training with those Noma creatures. They aren't the only ones I have trained with, but they have the most difficulty holding back. That part about bones was not theoretical, and believe me, it hurts more than your sword. Good, then maybe you'll get through tonight without whining. There was no time to respond before Shirakuro found himself fighting for his life, possibly literally. That had not been his last wound of the night, but to Stain's credit Shirakuro did not need to regrow any limbs, and after a while he did in fact guide Shirakuro on how to present more of a challenge. All in all, it was rather humbling. Shirakuro had quirks that could potentially have taken out the killer, like when catching him off guard with his venom, but without all that it was hard enough to give the man a momentary challenge. This had to be how Ijiro felt sparring without using his quirk, when he could actually feel his opponent's punches. Only Shirakuro's regeneration would allow him to survive the night without a scratch. That only applied to his body, though. His costume, despite its strong material, would need some sewing right after a good wash. Even though none of the cuts were too deep, his arms and hands especially were blood-stained enough that he was the one who looked more like a killer out of the two. Stain found errors and weaknesses in Shirakuro's technique even his father had not pointed out, expressing their presence with sneers. Many of those comments referred to inexperience, which Shirakuro interpreted as a positive thing. Then there were his comments about holding and treating the blade strangely. They kept going for hours, only stopping for long enough to step away every time Stain killed Shirakuro. After all that, the man only seemed barely tired, and had yet to give an explanation as to why he was doing any of this. Finally, Stain turned away and started wiping his sword. Shirakuro had much less to clean, though not nothing, and the cut on Stain's arm was the only one still visible. The man climbed on top of an air conditioning unit to sit down. Shirakuro leaned on his knees, catching his breath, eyes fixed on the man who seemed to stare at empty air. Shirakuro mentally slapped himself. This was a unique chance, and he was wasting it just staring. If he wasn't going to kill the man, he should at least learn more. He climbed on the other end of the air conditioning unit, not far enough to be out of sword's reach though. So, he started, why are you still here? In Hosu, I mean? Word of you crippling ingenium is everywhere, and anyone interested knows where to look for you. To tell the truth, it was surprisingly easy. Stain turned his head to glare. Shirakuro again felt like he was being hit by the killing intent quirk. And what do you want to know for? Shirakuro swallowed under the protection of his helmet. I am not trying to expose you to the heroes. Stain huffed. If I thought you did, you would no longer live. It does not answer my question. I am curious, Shirakuro said. I am still trying to understand your conviction. Both of us agree many of the heroes out here are not real heroes, but I still don't even know what you consider a real hero to be, or what you hope to achieve with your killing. There is clearly more than simply killing. At least you think there is. I purge fake heroes. Perhaps once you have more time to witness their actions, you will learn to do what is needed. And what is a... Shirakuro started, but Stain stood up. If you think you have the will to change anything, follow. If not, we will not see again. He jumped back down to the roof. Shirakuro wanted to complain about the promises that had been made, but quietly dropped down himself. He hung the knives he had gotten from Stain on his belt. Keep up. He jumped over the edge of the roof. Shirakuro rushed after him, unwilling to let the man disappear like the previous night. He found Stain 2 stories down, handing from a windowsill, dropping down another story, then pushing against the wall to jump on the next roof and keep going. Stain didn't even look back to make sure Shirakuro kept up. Shirakuro dropped down, barely caught the windowsill, and jumped towards the next roof from 1 story higher. He landed rolling and didn't even need to regenerate anything. If he did, he would have been too late to chase after Stain. On flat roofs, he kept up with the man fine enough, but despite his own agility traversing between the buildings, the distance kept extending between them. It had not been a part of his training. He mentally took notes to adjust his and others' future training to address the issue. Eventually, Stain stopped on a low building looking over 2 crossing alleys. He gestured Shirakuro to stay low and quiet once he caught up to the man. Stain checked the alleys, they were empty, then moved to the side overlooking a proper street. Keep an eye out for a hero. Someone specific? Long Arm of the Law. Usually people call him Long Arm. His quirk. Strek, Shirakuro interrupted. His body parts can stretch temporarily at high speed, though they don't bend any differently to everyone else. You are well informed. I investigated heroes in this area to find you, Shirakuro said quickly. Didn't have time to find much detail on Long Arm beyond what is easily available online. Worst I found was that material on him tended to be more about modeling than actual hero work. He hasn't been involved in anything major in a long time. Fake hero who cares more about himself than saving people. He needs to be purged. So what has he done to deserve death? You already said it. He seeks personal benefit, not selfless help as he should. Stain stepped closer to the roof's edge. Shirakuro raised his eyebrows under his helmet, but held back the most aggressive questions and forced himself to breathe first. That is all you know? It is all I need to know. Shirakuro stared at the man. But could he really blame Stain? It wasn't like he didn't largely agree with the man's description. He just wasn't as bloodthirsty, right? Long Arm doesn't like to spend too much time working, but wants people to think he does, so he makes regular patrols at different times on different nights. But he is predictable and only cares about places where he can be seen. Like the busy crossroad there, he pointed at the street, and a railway station that way. He pointed at the opposite direction that the alley led to. He takes a shortcut through this alley to not waste time. Should not be long now. They stood there waiting. Stain remained crouched, still like a statue, eyes locked on the street. He seemed the dictionary definition of patient, but Shirakuro had learned to read tiny movements in people's bodies in battle, especially using calm mind as he did now briefly. Tension on the man's face grew second by second. He might have been able to act patient, but internally he was itching for violence, and Shirakuro feared what would happen if those two facts clashed for too long. He moved quietly several steps, or several swords' lengths away from the man, not dropping his guard even as he partially turned his back to the man to look further up the street. Now facing away from Stain, Shirakuro opened the slit in front of his helmet and zoomed down to the street. For a while, all he could do was test how well he could focus on individual faces, but then he spotted it. The approaching hero was easy to notice from the group of people that gathered around him, but for a moment Shirakuro could only see the tall man's head properly behind the people until one of them moved briefly aside, revealing the man. He looked just like images Shirakuro found when searching his name online, though the red skin-tight short-sleeved costume hid more than whatever he wore in most of those images. He was large and muscular even for a hero, though more balanced and not such a boulder-like giant like All Might or Endeavor. He waved to the people, then tensed his arm to flex his bicep in front of a young woman, who touched it after the hero said something to her. His other arm was behind them, but still down around her hip level. The woman suddenly jolted and glanced down. "Found the reason he is late," Shirakuro said, and pointed at the distant group. Stain stepped closer. "Could be him. These fake heroes care more about fans than victims, especially this one. I can see that. Seems he is finally getting away from them. I think he realized he is late for his patrol. He is walking faster this way." Stain was quiet for a few seconds. "You can see him?" Shirakuro wordlessly pointed in the direction again. The man would have only been a red to Stain's eyes, but he had finally left the crowd, so spotting the man wouldn't be impossible. Shirakuro took a glance at the killer whose frown deepened once he spotted the approaching man. "If he is in a hurry, that makes this easier," Stain said and turned away. "Do not get in my way, or you will join him." He vaulted over the roof's edge at the corner over the alleys. Shirakuro kept discreetly monitoring the approaching man. A man approaching his death. Shirakuro swallowed a lump in his throat. He would be one of the last two people to see this man alive. If it was All Might or Endeavor, or even someone he knew to be like Native, Shirakuro could have stomached what was coming, but for Long Arm, all he knew was that the man did not focus on his hero work or do anything notable in it. He wasted the position, but killing for that was a bit much. Long Arm soon arrived by Shirakuro's building, walking rapidly on legs that now seemed a bit too long proportionally. Shirakuro also noted he did not seem to pay much attention to what happened around him. One could have asked what was the point of him being there. Just like Stain predicted, Long Arm turned to the alley as a shortcut as soon as he had passed the busier intersection with a lot of people to witness him. Like most, he never looked up. Shirakuro had to constantly remind himself to not fall for overconfidence and becoming careless. He reached the crossing of the alleys and stopped. There was another form obstructed by some fabric and partially covered by a garbage can from the hero's point of view. The setup was way too familiar. Part of Shirakuro hoped the hero would be better than that, but he got paid the same way Native did so. Long Arm pointed at the disguised Stain, who withdrew further behind the can as if he was scared. Long Arm turned fully towards him and raised his arm as if for a punch. His fist shot forward until it was fully extended, then kept going as his arm kept stretching towards Stain just as fast as the normal punch from the muscular man. If it had really been some poor person sheltering in that alley. Stain moved so quickly that even with night vision equipment Shirakuro had difficulty perceiving it from this distance. Suddenly his body was not in the way of the strike as a knife stuck up. Long Arm pulled his arm back in surprise, but it didn't even have time to shrink into its normal length before Stain brought the blade in front of his mouth. As useful as his quirk could be, Shirakuro definitely categorized it under the Not For Me folder. The hero collapsed on the ground with all the training to build those muscle wasted with a single moment of carelessness from brains that most likely lacked the same amount of training. Stain walked closer, his sword ready, speaking. Shirakuro could not hear it. Was he really going to just watch a murder, even if there seemed to be somewhat valid reasons for it? What did Stain even say to the man who would soon be a martyr used to depict images of what a hero should look like? Shirakuro vaulted over the roof's edge and landed on a fire ladder which he slid down not much slower than falling. His feet touched the ground mere seconds later behind Stain. Long Arm twitched, barely able to see in Shirakuro's direction. He struggled just to speak. "Help. It's Stain. Help me." Shirakuro frowned. The so-called hero didn't even know who he was. He could have been just a poor person sheltering on an alley, like who Long Arm had likely just thought he was attacking. Yet he was asking Shirakuro to challenge a serial killer rather than run away, and perhaps get proper help. Stain only tilted his head enough to see Shirakuro with one eye. "I told you to not get in my way." Shirakuro tugged on calm mind and bit his teeth together, feeling the dread of death from the single stare. Long Arm's face dropped in realization from the words as Shirakuro walked closer and became somewhat visible in the darkness. I have not, but I told you that simply killing them won't help. No one is going to see the true issues of heroes simply because you deem them not good enough for your standards. You should at least get him to confess what he has done first. I do not need confessions. I already know enough about this fake prioritizing his own gain over others, even exploiting those he should help. I know you saw it. I did, yes, but no one else did. At least give me a moment. You won't lose anything and might learn more about your target. Stain huffed and stepped aside just enough. Shirakuro forced his back straight and posture confident as he stepped in front of and over the doomed man on the ground. You attacked a random person you saw on the alley. Why? He's Stain, the hero killer. Can't you see that? I can. You did not before you already attacked him, Shirakuro said and started releasing killing intent. With his appearance, the blood around the tears in his costume would give it extra effect in front of the incapacitated man. I saw the sword. No, he did not, Stain muttered, his growing impatience only thinly veiled in his tone. I have to believe the killer on this, Shirakuro said and crouched in front of Long Arm, so he could see the man's face and the man could see his helmet. So why? He gave the man a chance, he really did, waiting for a long moment to let him confess. Did you think you could get an easy payday and bump in your statistics by arresting some poor guy on some false accusation?
No.
The man said, eyes already wide in fear. Shirakuro held one of Stain's knives in front of himself, balanced on a finger, making the blade clearly visible where it glinted in the nighttime light filtering through the alleyway. Really, because it seems to be a common way for lesser heroes to make a living around here. I guess you don't have time to find real criminals with all the modeling and fame taking your attention. Being a hero is really just a publicity stunt, a way to be favored over those who chose to only do the other things instead of taking the privileges of a hero from someone more deserving, isn't it? Shirakuro moved his finger and let the knife point at the man. Yes, modeling agencies love having heroes listed and people love the body of a hero. Whatever training I have to do to be a hero, I can just use that for modeling. And getting women? Well, yes, women love heroes in my body. Anything else? They just love you for what you are, however you act. Of course. I'm what every woman dreams of. What else would they do than love it when I give them the opportunity? Not like anyone would believe a random street chick if they claimed otherwise. He muttered the last phrase, but in his terror-induced talk failed to consider what he was saying. Not until the last word that was. Shirakuro was already squeezing the handle of the knife. The so-called hero must have sensed his reaction as a bloodlust through the quirk. The man was trembling despite the paralysis. No, I mean, exactly what you said. You use your position to get away with harassing women, if not worse.
No.
You can't fool us like other people. The only thing you can do is to admit what you have done. I can't hold back the guy with swords. I can try to convince him one more time if I can show you will suffer justice. Otherwise, he will absolutely kill you, and there is nothing I can do. Or rather, nothing I would do. Okay. I like women, especially pretty ones, and I usually get them. Sometimes they don't stay as excited as when they first see me, but women are like that. They get everything they could have wished for, and then suddenly don't want it right when I'm starting to enjoy myself. So you force yourself on them, Shirakuro said, uncertain if he should feel disgusted or be glad that Stain did not go after someone who just didn't focus on his job enough. No, I mean they do actually like it, the man said quickly. Not like most of them could ever get someone like me otherwise. Women just can't be clear and enjoy that chance without playing games with men. They might call it a crime, but so what? What's right or wrong shouldn't be based on some fickle women's games. Good thing on the street, the women stay quiet about their hang-ups afterwards. Not that most people would believe them.
Most?
Shirakuro asked. What happened to the rest? I had to arrest one, too, that were really going to talk. So, everyone thought anything they said was lies in an attempt to get released, Shirakuro said. I have heard enough, and so will everyone else. You'll get to be the figurehead of false heroes, at least until I can catch bigger fish. Shirakuro turned around and took a step towards Stain, refocusing his attention from the false hero to the killer. He didn't have much hope, but he still had to try. I recorded everything. We can expose him to everyone, and for much more than wasting time he could be using to help people. Stain stepped past Shirakuro. I already told you to not get in your way. Shirakuro sighed and did not turn around to watch as Stain's steps stopped and Long Arm gasped. No, no, no. Someone help me. His shouts of help soon turned into screams of pain and suddenly ended in a wet gargle. Shirakuro had the presence of mind to send a signal to prepare a fast getaway, though that might only have been a distraction to help keep his dinner down. Time to go, Stain said behind him. I know, Shirakuro responded and pointed at a warp gate that swirled into existence next to him. He half turned in front of it, offering an escape route to the killer, but making sure he looked high enough to not see what was on the ground. Stain stared at him and the warp gate for a few seconds, then approached. You first. That was one demand Shirakuro was more than willing to follow, but he made the mistake of glancing back once when his foot was already in the mist. There was so much blood in a puddle expanding from Long Arm's neck as he laid lifeless, face down on the asphalt. The warp gate led back to the top of the tallest building in the area where Shirakuro had started his search the previous night. He turned around, hoping Stain had not tricked him. For a few seconds things seemed concerning, but then a foot came through the gate, followed by rest of the man, sword still in his hand and dripping blood on the roof. You have big ideas, but you lack the will to achieve them, the killer said right away. No, Shirakuro responded after collecting his remaining bravery. My will is to find and expose the truth, not to simply kill people that might or might not deserve it. You think he did not deserve to die? From what I heard, perhaps more than many others. Neither of us knew it before. I knew enough. Well, Shirakuro hesitated. You clearly don't need to know much to kill someone. You claim to do it for a real conviction, but I'm starting to doubt that. Stain stepped closer. Shirakuro could feel a shiver go through his body, but something pushed him to continue talking, maybe since this might have been his last chance to do so. Seems you go around finding any hero to declare them fake for any reason. If your conviction was real, you would care more about who you go after. Long Arm turned out to be a rotten fake hero, but who was your last victim? Ingenium. What did that achieve? I could understand if you had killed Native, or went after someone like Endeavor. At the very least, then they personally could not keep doing what they have done. He was a fake hero like all of the rest. Is that so? Then why? What did he do? Why do you care about that fake so much? Stain asked. He stared at Shirakuro for a moment, but Shirakuro did not move, standing like he was responding to the stare. In truth, he was frozen still, afraid now also for being possibly exposed. He only helps people for pay like the others, and comes from family that has gained its riches the same way. They do not act for the sake of others alone. Really, that's all it took to go after him? Shirakuro forced his voice calm, but Izuku's switch was itching from all the consequences of the killer's previous actions. I did not go after him, Stain finally said, turning away from Shirakuro to look over the city. Even if he is a fake, there are many worse ones I need to purge first. He came after me. I don't allow people to stand in my way. Is that why you let him live? He can spread my message. Stain tilted his head to look back at Shirakuro. Even if I cannot reach every fake, they should at least think I will and know why. Maybe he did think about what he was doing, in his own grim way. Stain looked at the city again. Not many would dare to talk back at a serial killer, not even with your powers. Your conviction might be different, but it is strong. You can meet me in the same place next midnight if you are still up to challenging yourself. He stepped to the edge of the roof. Wait, Shirakuro said and pulled out the knives he had gotten from the killer. Remember to take them back. Stain frowned at him for a moment, but his face soon bent into a smirk. Keep them. You need much more training with them. I want to see what you can do. Then he was gone. Shirakuro was left standing on the roof. He raised his hand to look at the blades in his hand, the blades that had belonged to Stain, that had been used by Stain, possibly on Tenya's brother. The darkness that had encased him could have come from these blades. Even if Tensei had not felt their cold metal, Someone had. With Stain's body count, there was no way Shirakuro was not holding murder weapons right now. The sound of a sword sinking into Long Arm's body in the last seconds of the man's life right next to Shirakuro. The sound had been almost as bad as Izuku's dragon blade sizzling into a body. Shirakuro's legs were getting shaky. Everything got dark as he was encased in black mist until emerging in the dressing area of his training room. He grabbed his helmet and after struggling a bit pulled it off and threw it away only for the item to enter a small quick-to-emerge warp gate. He held his stomach and mouth. A strand of mist pulled open the bathroom door and Izuku got in right before vomiting. After a moment of emptying his stomach, he was left on his knees with just the taste of acid in his mouth. Hoping everything had come up that would come up, he got back on his feet and turned to face Kurogiri, who stood right outside the door with a large glass of water in hand. He offered it to Izuku. "Thank you," Izuku said quietly. "Am I doing the right thing? Meeting Stain is a risk, but you can learn much." "Learn what? To kill people?" "If you deem it necessary at some point to do so." Izuku sighed with a shudder. "I wanted to expose the rotten parts of society and keep a few people safe. How did I end up hanging out with a serial killer that would probably think they deserve to die? The internships are getting closer. What if Tenya finds Stain like his brother did?" Izuku looked at the bloody cuts on his costume. "He won't stand a chance if he does, and I'm taking others to look after him. If they're coming too, then there's even more at stake. They shouldn't trust me like this. I never deserved it. Not sure I have deserved anything." He was falling into muttering, but not the usual normal, calm, analytical type. This was more like a panic attack. He soon started running out of breath, feeling pressure in his throat as he forgot to breathe. In the end, he breathily muttered with fear lacing his voice. "What if everything I do is what gets them hurt?" "Young Shigaraki," Kurogiri said uncharacteristically forcefully. "Izuku." Izuku's head perked up. Kurogiri was holding a set of his clothes, dark-colored, but regular civilian clothes and a cap. "We need to go somewhere. Please clean up and change quickly." Kurogiri handed Izuku the clothes and turned away. Izuku was left in the doorway speechless. It had almost sounded like Kurogiri had given him an order. Izuku started cleaning up and soon joined the Nomu outside the room. He might not have deserved the trust he got from others, but did not hesitate when a warp gate opened in front of him. "Stay low and quiet," was all Kurogiri said as Izuku stepped towards the gate. "Should I have my helmet for this?" "No, this is for Izuku, not Shirakuro. You must stay hidden." Izuku nodded, not questioning the Nomu's judgment on the safety of what they were doing, and stepped through. He found himself standing on the flat roof of a large modern house and squinting in the darkness. The surroundings around him were familiar. He had lived in this area for more than a year now, and it didn't take long for him to focus on the large house next to this one, the Ida home. "Why are we here?" Izuku asked. "When you get worried, it is nearly impossible to calm you with words, at least for most individuals." Kurogiri raised his arm to point at the house and a window on that house. There was a gap in the curtain. Izuku zoomed in, but could not distinguish anything in the dark room. A black whirlpool formed right below the window and next to Izuku. After zooming back in, he tilted his head and raised eyebrows at Kurogiri. He was trying to help, but Izuku was terrified they could even do this to Tenya. Izuku stuck his head into the warp gate, emerging right below Tenya's window, so he could properly peek in. It was still near impossible to distinguish any detail, but there was just enough ambient light to make out a human-sized lump on top of the bed moving slowly with Tenya's breathing as he slept safe and comfortable. The whole situation felt wrong, but some pressure in his heart eased, just a bit. He pulled his head back and looked at Kurogiri. "Thank you." The Nomu did not say anything but seemed to twist into himself until only a warp gate remained. Izuku stepped through. Now he was looking at another house he recognized. With another peeping warp gate, he got a glance at the two messes of hair, both of which had bright enough red that Izuku could almost distinguish the color in the darkness. Both seemed to be sleeping peacefully without a care in the world. Izuku took a tour around the neighboring buildings to take a look from every direction and make sure there were no reporters or other intruders, besides himself. The next stop was at Hitoshi's apartment, but when Izuku peeked inside, there was actual light. Hitoshi was awake and seemed to just be looking at his phone. Izuku sighed. Hitoshi turned his head. Izuku pulled his back through the warp gate as quickly as he could. Close it, he told Kurogiri, who obeyed. The last location I have coordinates for is the young Tokoyami. No, Izuku said. Dark Shadow will be on guard. It is too dangerous. Are you certain? Yes. Checking on Toshi was already risky enough, but this really helped. I feel a little better. Thank you. Chapter 63. The Old Man. The screech of a train was the first thing Izuku heard as he stepped out of the car at the station. It had been a while since he had traveled in one with having nice cars, and more importantly a teleporting Nomu. Rest of the group joined him next to the car. Ijiro was practically radiating excitement with Shoto sticking close to that clean, plentiful, and renewable energy source. Tenya, however, stood to the side of the group, seeming more interested in the ground. Hitoshi walked behind Tenya with a large thermos on his hand and sneaked past him to block him from slipping away. They would be in the same train whether Tenya wanted to or not. Tenya, Hitoshi, Ijiro, and Shoto were going to have their internship close enough to each other to get the same train at least part of the way. Izuku was unlucky enough to not be in that group. Tokoyami ended up further away, but there weren't many better opportunities that existed for him in the hero world, and with Hawks he was likely going to move around a lot and quickly anyway. Izuku had orchestrated it all to keep Tenya safe, but now he was starting to fear having all of them in the area where Stain still lurked. At least none of them worked with native or other heroes Izuku had identified the most likely to be rotten. He walked with them as far as he could, but could not come into the train. Have a good internship, he said, and glanced at Tenya with begging in his eyes. Don't do anything stupid, including what you think I would do. Tenya looked away, but at least he wasn't leaving alone. Izuku exchanged looks with Hitoshi as he passed. Ijiro gave him a comforting smile. We'll keep our eyes open for him, he assured. Izuku had not exaggerated when he told All Might about the power of that smile. Shoto followed Ijiro. Hey, Izuku said. If anyone tried to talk good about Endeavor, berate you, or try to convince you to go back, remember that they are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. You do. Ignore them. Freeze them if you have to. I'll throw a lawyer at them if they raise an issue. Shoto nodded. Ijiro turned from the train door. Hey Shoto, the train is leaving. Izuku stood on the platform until the end of the train passed him, and then some. There was something dark in the image of the train, moving to the distance out of his reach. Finally, the train turned behind a bend and disappeared. Izuku headed to another platform. Less than an hour later, he was walking down a street looking for the address. He had already checked the place online from a Street View map, so he knew he was not looking for any fancy hero agency or agency at all. As he stopped in front of the rundown 4-story apartment building, he was still disappointed. It seemed even worse than the images from a few years back. With a worn-out outer surface and some broken windows, the building looked outright abandoned. Alarm bells were ringing in Izuku's head. Could All Might and this Gran Torino have plotted this whole thing to lure him into an abandoned building out of sight to deal with him? If they did, they would be unpleasantly surprised, but Izuku's life as Izuku would be over. That would give him time to keep an eye on Stain around the clock, but he knocked and waited. There was no response. He knocked again and noticed that the door was open. With apology, he pushed the door partially open. Hello. I am Izuku Midoriya from UA High School. I'm looking for. Still no response. His eyes descended towards the door. There was a small old man in white and yellow hero costume laying on his face with something red staining the floor around him. Image of long arm laying on the ground flashed in Izuku's mind. The sight in front of him was nearly a one-to-one replication of that moment. Izuku drew a sharp breath, but none of it felt like it reached his lungs. Had Stain come here? Or was this a part of a plot against Izuku? Should he back away, or get in to try to help? The old man's head perked up. Past Izuku would have jumped back and screamed at the sudden movement. Current Izuku tensed and dropped the suitcase with his costume as his arms twitched upwards ready to fight. I am alive, the old man announced. Izuku's shock quickly turned into annoyance as the old man slowly got back to his feet. Was this some kind of joke at him? Even the fact those words reminded him of Ijiro somehow annoyed Izuku. At least Ijiro had had a robot larger than this building dropped on him before saying those words. The elder, shorter than even Izuku as he leaned on his walking stick, stood in front of Izuku's stupid expression on his face. Izuku still could not decide if this was a trap, or if he had picked an internship with a senile man. Or perhaps that was All Might's plot. Make Izuku waste his internship time babysitting a demented guy. Well, if that was the case, it might give him more room to do what was truly important. He gave the old man a tired look. "Are you Gran Torino? What happened here?" Izuku demanded to know. "Oh, this. I had a nice big plate of sausages covered with ketchup when I suddenly slipped and fell down." "Oh, I see. Well, if you make yourself more food, I'll go outside to do some real training for this internship." Izuku turned around reaching down for the suitcase, but there was a swish and it was gone. There was a click. Izuku spun around to find the old man going through his stuff. His legs were no longer as shaky as before, and he was crouching down with no issue ringing Izuku's alarm bells again. "Hey!" Izuku shouted. "It is a fine costume. I hear you have some decent fighting skills even besides quirks. How about you throw a punch at me?" That had been Izuku's first instinct, but now he got suspicious. The stare the old man gave from side of his eyes did not help his suspicion. Izuku's eyes glanced around looking for anyone else in the room or cameras that could frame him for an assault. "I'm not sure that is a good." He never moved enough to move Gran Torino out of his sight. Until the old man moved himself. Without all of Father's air cannon training, Izuku would not even have initially noticed anything but the elder disappearing. Now he could at least follow Gran Torino's movement jumping between walls and the floor to hit the wall above the door with enough force to crack it and hang from it over Izuku, who had dodged from his final approach and was now facing the man above him. "It's time you show me what you can do, you newbie. I watched the UA Sports Festival on television. The way you used your power and attacked the hero profession reminded me of some bad memories. Your fighting skills were impressive, but I suspect it is not All Might who is training you well. He might be the symbol of peace and #1 hero, but that man is a total novice when it comes to teaching. I can only imagine what blunder he is in the classroom." Izuku found himself liking the man more already, even if he was still suspicious. "I'm not going to argue with you on that," he muttered, then spoke more clearly and demanding. "It does not explain why you offered this internship to me. Of course, we both already know it is because of my quirk. It is not just any quirk. It is all for one." Izuku took some joy in how the old man's face twisted at the words. Must have been more of those bad memories. Gran Torino dropped from the ceiling, landing softly with a puff of dust. "I hear you have experience with it, the quirk and the man."
Gran Torino frowned.
"I see All Might has been more open with you than he let me understand."
No, Izuku corrected.
"I learned about that before ever going to UA, and the only teacher that even tried being open about All for One was someone more competent, a bit more at least. Well, at least he hasn't become as much of a loudmouth as I thought. I also know about his true physical condition," Izuku said, unable to resist the opportunity. He smirked, a mix of devious and happy smirk. "He won't be able to be a hero much longer. Can't wait the day people see what a walking blood-couching sack of bones he really is." Gran Torino stared at him for a few seconds, then literally face-palmed. He muttered something inappropriate under his breath. Izuku enjoyed every second, but did not forget the situation he was in. Shirakuro had made mistakes giving Stain initiative in their first encounters. Izuku did not intend to make the same mistake in this verbal fight. "I am not interested in your opinions of my quirk," he said to set the proper tone. "The only question is, what are you plotting? Are you two going to spy on my life? Or do you expect me to prove my worth more than others just because of how I was born?" Gran Torino stared at him for a moment. "Me too spy? Who?" "All Might," Izuku responded with the venom in his voice by now permanently associated with the name, "and his police friend." Gran Torino let out a long sigh, shaking his head. "Is that man trying to turn you into a new All for One? He's even worse of a blunder than I thought. Good thing I got to you when I did." Was he starting to sound like Aizawa? Izuku mentally slapped himself to remind himself to remain vigilant. "Are you thinking that how people, like him, treat me would make me a villain, and you want to try to push me in the correct direction?" Izuku asked with a tired voice, even if happy that he was still ahead on this conversation.
Gran Torino Ahmed.
Sounds like I am not the first. That should be good, though considering what I heard at the festival there is still work to be done. Why? Izuku asked, his stare suddenly harsher. Because I don't blindly praise everything that is done or people on top with how things are? Most villains do what they do for personal benefit, some because they enjoy power and violence. The most dangerous ones become villains because they seek control or change in something in the wrong ways. The line between seeking to fix things you think are broken and forcing your will on others is not always clear. My will is that people are not judged based on how they were born, Izuku said, simultaneously more annoyed and on guard. That all rights are not given for some based on the same, and restricted from others for no reason. Gran Torino looked at him for a long silent moment. I was afraid of this. What? Izuku barked. Are you going to pretend I'm wrong? Gran Torino walked past Izuku back deeper inside the room. Maybe, maybe not. He turned back to Izuku. But it is not so much your words that have me concerned, but the tone they were said in, the look in your eyes, the stance of being prepared to fight when simply stating your views. I do not know much of how you have been guided so far, but I doubt it is any good, and you are one that could easily be pushed on the wrong path, and not just because of your quirk. And who determines the right path? Those who got pushed to the top by how things work now. Gran Torino thought about that for a moment. You go to UA, so wouldn't you be one of those? I only went to UA because of certain people going there, and got immediately spied on by the principal and All Might. Then I got nearly murdered by the least heroic person I've ever known that everyone thought would become a hero because how he was born, including UA. Izuku's eyes got darker. And that was after he tried to attack and threaten some others. He struggled to maintain his calm and not release any killing intent. Still managed to give Gran Torino pause, leaving him to stare at Izuku until the old man gathered himself. I see. There is a lot of work to do, he said, suddenly clearly struggling to find the next words. How about that punch? I am supposed to train you for the hero work after all, and the sports festival left me curious. Put on your suit, and we'll do some work. Izuku accepted the excuse to end this discussion and changed into his costume. Gran Torino waited quietly until Izuku pulled on the last glove. Now, Pu, the old man said, but Izuku was already upon him, his fist striking out too fast for an average person to even follow. It only met empty air as the elder whisked away and started bouncing between walls, floor, and ceiling at extreme speeds. Witnessing him and his quirk in action had Izuku almost licking his lips. There was none of the imbalance and trouble he had with his own jets. Was that because of the man's experience and training, or was his quirk just better? Izuku activated Calm Mind, just a little bit, enough to block distractions and better track the speedy elder. Izuku jumped to the side to dodge a sudden attack from the elder, who flew right past. At least father's training was perfect for preparing Izuku for this.
Gran Torino spun around.
There was tiny shakiness for a fraction of a second as he was caught by surprise, not hitting Izuku. To his credit, he moved with experience, turning back to a new attack without hesitation. Unfortunately for him, Izuku's training had also emphasized attacking, and especially counterattacking, without hesitation or mercy. His fist was already encased in the near-solid flames of the Dragon Fist technique and launched at the little old man like he was trying to crack open Ijiro, lacking the natural holding back he exhibited with his other friends. Gran Torino whizzed out of the way just in time before testing how tough the old bones were. Izuku turned after him, but the elder suddenly changed direction and was now coming in from the other side. Izuku was still mid-turn to respond when Gran Torino's feet hit him. The impact pushed him backward, but not with nearly the entire mass and momentum of the old man. It hurt, but wasn't enough to knock Izuku down properly as air flowed through the elder's body and started pushing him away. This time he was too slow. Izuku caught his cape and yanked. Instead of flying away, Gran Torino slid on the floor. Izuku's fist swung around, still encased in Dragon Fist. By the time he started thinking what he was doing, it was already too late to stop. Air whizzed and Gran Torino slid out of the way just in time. Izuku's fist hit hard enough to crack the floor tile and leave behind a fist-sized scorch mark. That was less of a problem than the fact he had refused to let go of Gran Torino. His balance was great, but the punch combined with the yank from the elder's quirk were enough to pull Izuku off his feet. His face approached the floor as Gran Torino disappeared from his sight. Izuku twisted his body enough to hit the floor on his side and fall on his back. Gran Torino's hand filled his vision and slammed on his face where the back of his head had just been. Izuku stopped on his back on the floor with a thud and had his head pressed down by Gran Torino. The elder was already breathing audibly harder, must have been his age, though it sounded like he was recovering quickly. Well, I must admit I wasn't expecting you to fight this well. You might be inexperienced, but the potential is there. Some more training, and you might beat me. Might, Izuku said, and his eyes moved downwards. The fires were still lit on his hand, but the thick cover of Dragon Fist technique had stretched again into a blade, though it was still short and thick, more like a knife or dagger than a sword. That dagger was pointed right at Gran Torino's side and further in the heart. Izuku wouldn't even need to move his arm, just stretch the dragon blade to its normal length and his opponent would be dead. Gran Torino straightened out, getting further from the fire and releasing Izuku's face. Clearly your skills are not based on All Might's teachings. Stop repeating that name. I spend more time helping to fix what his teaching and example do to others than learning from him, Izuku said, dispersing the fire. Some of EI's punches are still over-exaggerated smashes that leave him open, and the man isn't even his primary idol. I mean, most people couldn't hurt him open or not, but he shouldn't rely on that, and I don't want others taking bad example from him. Rest of Gran Torino's weight left Izuku. Some attacks Shoto threw in our training looked a lot like Ijiro's. Izuku kept muttering about the matter he just realized, before noticing the man's weight was gone and he was holding out his hand to help Izuku up. Suddenly Izuku remembered who he was dealing with. His stare hardened, his body bent and tensed, and he flipped back on his feet without the man's help looking down at him. Did you get what you wanted? No, the world is not that simple, and neither are you. The man walked to the door. Right now I need to go get more food since mine fell on the floor. You should consider what I said about the line. There is a Western phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, especially if those intentions were born out of anger. Anger only leads to hatred, and that usually ends with suffering. He stepped outside, leaving Izuku to frown alone. A line? He had already crossed over any line Gran Torino would consider, going so far past he couldn't even see the line anymore, but he was doing it for the right things. He wouldn't be allowed to change enough things, or help everyone who needed it from inside the line. Izuku followed from the window Gran Torino walking away until he was confident the man had actually left, then started walking around the apartment. Was this really the apartment of a pro hero that had even taught All Might at UA? It was spacious, sure, and even looked better than the outside, but that was not a high bar. It was worn out, even not counting the damage from their fight, mainly Gran Torino crashing on and bouncing from surfaces and furniture. Izuku's eyes moved to the heavy cracking on the wall above the door where the elder had hit the wall and hung on the wall from the damage his landing had caused. Izuku made a mental note to not underestimate the old man's toughness, considering he had caused that damage without breaking anything, and Izuku wasn't yet completely certain of who would come out on top in a real battle between them. At least not who would come on top the first time. Izuku could have multiple tries that the elder would not. He focused his attention on looking for any signs of other people or cameras watching him, or any evidence that the apartment was faked. He tried to look like he was just getting familiar with the space, hiding his investigation behind restlessness that would not have been out of place for a student on the first day of an internship with a pro, even if the place was no hero agency, not even a home office. If he was genuinely seeking to become a hero, he would be beating himself up right now for not getting to literally any other place. Eventually, Izuku gave up on his search, not finding people or spy equipment, and ended up standing by window monitoring the outside half of the time, and looking at his phone the other half. Hitoshi had changed the group chat's name to Izusquad. Again, Izuku quickly renamed it to No Coffee for Toshi, and started reading the most recent messages. There weren't many new ones since he checked them already walking from the station. Tenya had been quiet the whole day, but everyone else had at least confirmed they had reached their internship places. Ijiro had been eager to meet the hero Mr. Brave. He practically picked him based on the name alone, and the pro specialized in close combat with weapons made of his hair. Izuku had wondered if he could stand blade to blade against Stain, but now, it was only a small comment about how Ijiro thought the hero was weaker than he thought, but from the always excited redhead with a history of lacking confidence in himself, that comment was significant. It made Izuku feel sorry for having talked Ijiro into changing his internship place and wondered what kind of pro hero could seem weak to a first-year student. Or perhaps the issue was the student. Yes, that had to be it. At least the idea felt better. Tokoyami was busy running and trying to fly after hawks. The hero had taken him with him on patrol and flown off right away. Tokoyami and Dark Shadow would need more flight training to keep up with the winged hero. Hitoshi sent a sad face and coffee cup emojis. Their antics eased Izuku's feeling a bit, and he put the phone away. He was here to learn and train, so he might as well. He took the backpack with his stuff and hung the hero costume suitcase on it on his back, then found a good door frame. It took a small jump to get a good hold of the top of the frame, and he started doing pull-ups. Focusing on exercise was the third most efficient way to calm his mind and heart right after calm mind and Izu squad. The apartment did not give him many options, so he went through a set of body weight, or backpack weight, exercises then went through it again. Gran Torino returned at some point, but he didn't interrupt Izuku and Izuku didn't have any urge to talk with him. He only stopped to check his chat messages and news titles in case there was anything on Stain. Nothing new. Something weighing on your mind? Gran Torino asked, placing 2 plates on the table. Izuku first intended to not respond, but the man kept looking and waiting, and Izuku's stomach grumbled. Several, he said, turning towards the table. Anything you want to talk about?
Gran Torino asked.
Did he really try to pull off a trusted mentor act with Izuku? Not with you. His phone pinged. Todoroki messaged that he had caught a criminal. Izuku could almost hear the quiet, emotionless voice saying it like he was telling the weather, but that still made him smile as he wrote his congratulations. Even Tenya responded, and before Izuku ever reached the table. So at least he was paying attention and alive, most importantly alive. A moment later, Izuku raised his eyes from the screen only to meet Gran Torino's quiet stare. While it might not have been the smartest choice, Izuku refused to yield. Eventually, the elder tilted his head and lost the staring contest. As long as you have someone to talk with, the one whose name you do not like to hear might have mentioned something to that extent. He sat down and began eating. A moment later, Izuku did the same. After a post-meal break, which Izuku cut short with more solo training, Gran Torino decided they should train again, which consisted of him bouncing around the room trying to pound Izuku with kicks and punches. One time, while successfully blocking Gran Torino's foot, and doing so without burning the man, Izuku realized he was smirking. Gran Torino was able to give him a clear challenge, providing a more advanced and complex version of Father's air cannon training or Tenya's more straightforward attacks. Izuku was enjoying himself, not even noticing the passage of time. He might have continued till the next day, but after not that long of a time, Gran Torino started slowing down noticeably. Izuku could block or avoid a larger and larger share of his attacks. After one such dodge, he spun around to react to the next one, but Gran Torino was bent over, leaning on his knees, moving several centimeters up and down with every heavy breath as he gasped for air. Really gasped. Izuku stepped closer, but did not feel quite concerned enough to just move in to support the man. He too had started breathing harder, but was already well on his way to recovering. Gran Torino staggered to the nearest chair, sitting in silence, except for his breathing, for a long time before being able to speak again. I am getting too old to do this much longer. You lasted much longer than you looked like you could, Izuku said before even realizing. But it was true. Maybe Izuku could at least respect the man's skill and taking care of himself so well even at such an age. Izuku gave the man a moment longer to catch his breath until his own impatience got too much. So what now? Now? Now this old man hopes to keep his heart in his chest. Maybe we'll take a walk in the evening and discuss a bit about actual hero work. If you still have that much energy, you can continue exercising on your own. Seems you could do that fine. Or you could just take a break. I have better times to spend time on breaks, Izuku muttered. I can manage training on my own, though. Izuku thought for a moment, then spent another moment convincing himself to do the sensible thing. Once you are feeling better, he started. There is one thing I've been having difficulties with on my own that you might be able to help. That jet quirk you got from USJ, Grant Torino stated. Izuku looked at him for a long moment. The old man scowled. Don't look at me like that. You showed it at the sport festival long before he whose name shall not be mentioned told me. True, Izuku admitted quietly. It is very difficult to control. I know it can let me fly, but I can only make long jumps effectively, and even its original owner needed a wingsuit to keep balance at speed. Not surprising considering where they are.
Gran Torino Said.
What do you mean? Gran Torino pointed at Izuku's shoulders, and as Izuku turned his torso, he could see the bumps where the jets were. Can you turn them to direct the thrust? Yes, to some extent. Izuku flexed some muscles that had not existed few months ago. His shoulders twitched and the bumps on his shirt moved. That is your problem, and how close to each other they are. Gran Torino raised his foot to show the sole of his boot, which was full of holes. We are naturally built to balance on our feet, and I can easily direct which way the air flows by moving my feet. He put his foot back down, looking at Izuku. You, on the other, are hanging of a trapeze from your shoulders, and cannot control it any more than you can shrug and change your center of gravity. If you want to fly any distance without help like with that shadow quirk, you will need to learn to control parts of your body that did not previously exist and do so exceptionally precisely, more like flying a helicopter than a plane. It is not impossible, but will take time and training will be dangerous. I have already accounted for that. It is part of the reason why we often train at a beach. I might eventually find a quirk to help, but can't rely on that. No, you should not. I will think about this. There might be some training I can provide. Can you hover yet? Perhaps a few seconds. I think I could keep my balance if I could keep the jet steady, but controlling their power is even more difficult than the direction. Then you should start with that. You can use my doorway again. The old man pointed at the interior door where Izuku had previously done pull-ups. Izuku just looked puzzled. If you hang from the door frame, you can keep yourself still while finding the right amount of power. Brace against it if you are using too much and hang from it if you aren't using enough. That seemed easy enough to you. Of course. Why didn't I think of that? If I had to guess, I'd say you rush straight to practical use before training individual aspects of the quirk. You need to learn how to balance standing on your feet before you can run. Even starting with walking is not enough. When you can produce constant steady thrust, we can talk other things. Okay, Izuku said, and went to the door wondering if he had made the same mistake with the others' training. They all had a decade of experience with their quirks, so their situations were a bit different, except with Tenya, of course, maybe Hitoshi to a lesser extent. Izuku hopped to hang from the doorframe without the jets, then focused, testing his lower limit of how little power he could use while still using the quirk. It was like squeezing some hidden muscles while not allowing them to really move. One moment the tension got too much. Something yanked and air flowed out of his back with a whistle. His head hit the ceiling before he could tense his arms enough to hold himself down. The same repeated twice, but each time Izuku was more prepared to stop himself. You are too tense, Gran Torino commented from below. He had dragged a chair in front of the door and was eating some sweets. You hold it in until you can't and push too hard. I figured. Try pushing with however high power you can, and then start easing it down without dropping. That helped, and soon there were moments where Izuku could feel his arms relax, his entire weight carried by the jets, until he slipped too much in some direction with the power, or twitched enough to ruin his balance. Gran Torino gave occasional advice, but did not waste time with pretend positive comments whenever he hit his head or almost fell to the ground. In the end, they spent rest of the day practicing with Izuku's jets only and never even stepped outside. As Izuku hovered in the doorway with fingers of one hand, barely touching the frame for more than 10 seconds, he even managed to swipe sweat off his face before having to grasp the frame again as he started to tilt. His stomach grumbled once he stabilized himself. Might I convince you to finish for the day, or did you plan to continue till morning? I could try, Izuku responded, gasping. I got a quirk for that. Though if my jets keep hurting like this, I probably won't even have the option to sleep. Then you should most certainly stop. I am sure you have already heard someone compare quirks to muscles and how to train them, but that also applies in the negative, especially for mutant-type quirks. Your jets are body parts like any other. Don't damage them. That wasn't really a concern for Izuku, but he nodded without fighting and dropped down back to the floor for the first time in a while. He rotated his sore arms while realizing how hard he was breathing. Gran Torino glanced back at him. I'm impressed you are still going after pushing through that much air. Most people don't realize how tiring a quirk like this can be. Like, even simple things like jogging or running. Yeah, Izuku said, breathing a little easier but still hard. What kind of training should I do to help with that? Still focused on the job, Gran Torino muttered and pointed his walking stick at Izuku's chest. If your quirk works like mine, the important thing is core strength and balance in your body, also lung capacity. The jets might not get their air directly from your breathing, but using them for a prolonged time is like running a marathon. Worse, I felt better after a marathon, Izuku said, then glanced down and rubbed his chin. Now that I think of it, breathing and being able to absorb oxygen is critical for almost anything physical I could do. He started writing on a notebook. Regular training should already help with that, but there should be more that I can do, and perhaps there are quirks that improve it. It would be handy, but quirk like that would be hard to even notice. People with something like that might not recognize its potential. I should review the emails again. Just need to identify relevant. Mutter. Gran Torino at least had the decency to interrupt Izuku's line of thought, even if he was muttering. By the time he stopped on his own, his jets had stopped hurting. There was a lot less sunlight outside and some warm food was steaming on the table in front of him, quite a lot of it. Eat before it gets cold. By my estimate, you just spin at least that much. Thank you, Izuku said quietly, just barely remembering who he was talking with. Once you are done, do some stretches, and after that no more training today, or you might hurt yourself, Gran Torino said. Izuku frowned but didn't talk back. He had to settle with stretching, chatting, and listening to the old man talk about hero work for rest of the evening. Thankfully, it was not very long as Gran Torino headed to sleep early. Izuku pretended to do the same in the next room, but instead maintained sleep-deprived, remaining perfectly awake as he moved against the wall to listen for any sounds from the other room. After feeling confident Gran Torino had fallen asleep, Izuku confirmed it by moving to listen through the ajar door. He dressed on his, still sweaty, hero costume for an excuse in case he got caught and sneaked out of the door. He soon found a dark alley with nothing but some bags of garbage. He quickly pressed a button on his watch repeatedly and waited until a dark spiral emerged from nothing in front of him. Izuku was stuck away from Hosu, but Shirakuro could still go wherever he needed to. Chapter 64, Masters and Apprentices. Shirakuro flinched and bit his teeth together as cold steel cut into his arm, deeper than before, deep enough to scratch bone. He jumped back, but the knife was left behind, clinging against the roof. It took him a moment to catch his breath and heal before he could talk without wailing in pain. You were holding back last night, and you keep coming back from everything, so why complain? Wasn't complaining, Shirakuro responded. It was mostly the truth. His confidence had taken a hit when he started doing even worse than the previous night. There was only so much he could do to compensate for lack of experience, especially while not actively using his quirks, and not even having the option to use several of them. Stain used his sword to lift Shirakuro's fallen knife off the roof, then in one move caught and threw it at Shirakuro, who narrowly caught it. Without his gloves, his hand would have bled, though. Good. Had enough of that yesterday. You don't survive in the shadows thinking like that. Are you talking about? Shirakuro had to pause to keep his confident voice from failing. What you did to Long Arm. I have yet to see your fantasy about people turning on that fake come true. I have not released the recording yet, Shirakuro responded. I have been collecting more information on him first to go with it. People are going to deny things on the video, so I want to give people a clear path to dig out more. Well, aren't you thoughtful? I can send my material out now if you want. If you need a break, just say it. I might give you a moment since you were a kid. Shirakuro decided to not try to argue that with the observant killer. The risk of exposing more by accident was not worth it. He still huffed, trying to sound amused by the accurate suggestion. The killer at least seemed to hold his word and did not attack Shirakuro as he pulled out his highly modified and secured phone and turned it on. He already had everything in one folder with a bunch of single-use online accounts and a list of social media platforms ready to post on. It took a while to tap through all of them, even trying to hurry, But despite the impatient serial killer next to him, he got through everything without finding a sword in his guts. He turned off the phone again. It is done. Make sure to watch the news the next couple of days. The killer's stare did not change. Shirakuro took one more risk. You might want to move away from Hosu, though. Why are you so eager for me to leave? Because, when the news hits, it will draw even more attention to you being here. I already killed the fake, many of them, and no one has caught me. Finding you wasn't that difficult, Shirakuro muttered. You haven't caught me. Neither did those who found me before. You should know that with how you talked about Ingenium. I did not come to catch you. Which reminds me, when are you going to hold your end of our deal? Stain frowned. For most people, that would have been enough to back off. You really think there is any point to me meeting the other Shigaraki? Not likely, but that is what I'm here for. Well, these meetings have been useful. I could consider some even after you meet Tamura, but I'm not interested in being dragged along with empty promises. Meet him. Talk to him. If you end up hating him, that is not my responsibility, and you will keep doing what you want. I would anyway. They stared at each other for a long moment before it hit Shirakuro. Would. Better get it out of the way. I'm tired of listening to you asking. Shirakuro did not respond to that. I have heard what you think is your conviction. I want to hear the conviction of the other Shigaraki. There has to be something to do what he has done. Shirakuro pressed his lips together, but accepted the success of his mission. The rest was Tamura's problem. Tomorrow night good? He asked. Stain looked away from him at the city. It has to be earlier than these meetings. We can skip tomorrow if you meet Tamura. I can't guarantee I'm free the next few nights anyway, Shirakuro said. And why is that? I'm not going to tell you that. How about you? What do you think? Shirakuro knew exactly what the man meant. Anyone specific? You will see. This is one you also consider a fake at least. Shirakuro was already running through a mental list of people he had investigated and mentioned to the killer. It was a challenge to not have a notebook appear on his hand to make sure, but the list of people he had talked out loud about in front of the killer was not very long. Native? He guessed. Stain's face did not even twitch. So how will I find this Tamura? Kurogyri, Shirakuro responded without elaboration, and dark mist materialized next to him. We only need to agree on a location and time to pick you up. Stain looked at the Nomu skeptically. Shirakuro continued, speaking with seriousness in his voice he could not normally muster in front of the killer. Do not even think about trying to harm him in any way. Stain finally turned to look at him again now with a wide smirk. After agreeing on when and where he would meet Kurogyri, they trained a little more. But soon Stain suddenly left without explanation, leaving Shirakuro sitting next to the edge of the roof, healing his newest wounds. Without a word, Kurogyri had already began scrubbing the roof. Shirakuro tried moving his helmet up to get proper fresh air, but put it back on as soon as the stench of whatever the Nomu was using hit him. With such a stench, he was surprised the chemicals hadn't melted through the roof already. At least he could be confident any DNA he had sprayed across the place would not survive. Are you ready to return? Kurogyri asked after Shirakuro's final wounds had closed and completely disappeared. He waited a moment to answer and glanced over the roof's edge. No, I want to take a look around first. As you wish, but please try not to make more of a mess. It would take too long to clean several roofs. Towels and papers dropped from darkness onto Shirakuro's lap along with some cleaning spray, making him take a closer look at himself. The wounds might have healed, but his clothes hadn't, not to mention the blood that was already on them. The only bloodied spot left on the roof was exactly where he was sitting. Sorry. A bit of Izuku got into Shirakuro's voice. He got up to a crouch to give Kurogyri room to clean and started wiping the worst off himself, at least enough to not drip everywhere he went. A small warp gate next to him worked as a convenient garbage can for used towels and papers. Thank you, he said as he finished and started walking along the side of the roof, trying to remember what he had learnt about different heroes' patrol habits. Within the few steps, he sped up to a run and leaped right to the next roof, then the next one. Some of his landings were not perfect and every jump still made him nervous, only barely making one of them. But he was glad for Stain's unintended crash course on this form of transit. Once he reached his destination, he crouched by the edge to observe the street below. soon feeling Kurogiri's presence behind him. He focused on the street below, zooming in with his eyes, waiting. Soon a couple of heroes arrived and gathered at a nearby parking lot. A few others soon followed. Kurogiri covered Shirakuro under dark mist until a flying hero with the group arrived, just in case she had come over them. Good thing he had made it a point to teach Izuku's squad to look up sometimes. Shirakuro face-bombed his helmet, silently cursing Hitoshi about the whole squad thing. Finally, Shirakuro spotted what he was looking for. The pro-hero manual walked on the street directly below Shirakuro, and he was accompanied by a new partner in what seemed to be full body armor. A weight dropped from Shirakuro's shoulder, just for a moment though, as he realized there was no one else with them. Just one pro-hero and a first-year student when the hero killer had just claimed a victim in the area. Shirakuro had not found anything too dark about manual yet, but that hardly helped if all it took to be on Stain's list was to take pay and not be All Might. At least they now had a whole group together in the open while finishing their patrol. Even Stain would not attack that. Izuku might actually sleep for what little would be left of the night. Shirakuro laid his hands on the edge of the roof and rested his head against them, watching the duo pass and safely approach the group. He was especially glad to see Tenya's head still turning around, keeping an eye on his surroundings, including behind him despite the end of the patrol. Even Manuel, as a so-called pro, seemed to only focus on waving to his colleagues. Shirakuro did not pay him much attention, preferring to watch as Tenya checked both directions before crossing the street. Once they were across, Shirakuro suddenly found himself looking directly at Tenya's face, while the face of his helmet, as Tenya looked up, checking the rooftops, and stopped looking at Shirakuro's direction. They were basically facing helmet to helmet, even if Tenya shouldn't see him, or at least not distinguish any details from that distance against the dark sky. Izuku should help arrange some optics in his helmet. Shirakuro blinked inside his and pulled back from the edge. Time to go. After a change of clothes and a period of recovering, more mentally than physically, Izuku snuck back into Gran Torino's house. It was totally easy with no apparent security. It would have been so easy for a villain to take out the old man even without Stain's skills. Izuku quickly changed out of his hero costume this time and got to bed. It only took minutes to fall asleep, even if the sleep itself did not last much longer. After getting up, Izuku headed to the kitchen. Thanks to the sleep-deprived, he was still feeling fresh, like he had slept 10 hours. But in a different way, he could feel the limits of the quirk filling. He tried to calculate how much time he had stored, but he had still slept short periods, so it wasn't as easy as remembering when he previously woke up. The calculation was interrupted by Gran Torino. "Good morning, kid. Sleep well, for whatever time you actually slept." "What do you mean, actually?" Izuku asked, acting well-rested and cheerful, at least more cheerful than one would expect from him with a stranger. "I woke up during the night. You were not here. Thought about looking for you, but it is a big town, and after yesterday I figured if something happened with you, it would be the other people I would need to worry about." "Was that a compliment?" Izuku asked. "So where were you?" "I couldn't sleep, so I went to get some extra training." "Couldn't, or thought you wouldn't need to?" Gran Torino pressured and poked Izuku with his cane. "Well, tried to." Izuku tilted to the side, evading the cane before he even thought about it. "I didn't need to. I told you I have a quirk for that." Gran Torino held the top of his nose and sighed. "Even if that is the case, every quirk has its limits and costs. Whatever your quirk does to compensate, your body still needs rest sooner or later. You should not use a quirk like that when you don't need to." Izuku turned his head. Mostly because looking at the old man, he could imagine a worried Hitoshi in his place. "I know. Knowing and understanding are two different things. So is accepting and acting accordingly, for that matter. Young people often have difficulty with the latter parts. I guess we just have to cut the day short more than I planned." "What do you mean, short?" Izuku asked.
Gran Torino waved a hand.
"I'm supposed to give you practical experience on being a hero. You are not going to get that in my living room. We'll go on a night patrol, and before that you, are going to have a good long nap during the day, and no sneaking out. I know he who shall not be named always talks about going beyond limits, but there are limits you don't want to pass, at least not unnecessarily." Part of Izuku wanted to argue, but that could have had him defending All Might, and the Elder wasn't technically wrong. Izuku could imagine himself giving the same speech to any of the others if the roles were reversed. So, what are we going to do before that nap? Izuku changed the topic. Impatient are you? Gran Torino shook his head. First we are going to eat a nice big breakfast, then talk a bit about the work of a hero, and you can tell me more about your quirks that I should be aware of, which is all of them. That was what he thought, though as long as Izuku remembered to draw a clean line between his and Shirakuro's quirks, he could have talked about quirks till the end of the internship. He already had to mentally slap himself to focus. And then? Then you get a second chance to punch me. I might have gotten slower over the years, but your performance yesterday was already quite impressive. I only ask you mind the old bones. Strength is valued in this profession, but injuring the hero you train under is generally not reflected positively in your grades. I can try to do that. Do or do not, and in the later case admit to it now. There is no try, not when using violence on anyone, whether training or not. If you are not confident in your ability to control your use of force, even in the most intense of situations, you should not pursue this career. As a hero, your second goal is always to catch the criminals, alive and uninjured. Sometimes they don't make it possible, at least not with certainty, but if you need to injure someone, you should always consider it a failure, not an achievement even if you win. Your job as a hero is not to win. That is easier said than done in a real battle. That is why we train. I hope the teachers today teach this basic lesson. You know who teaches us? Yes. Gran Torino brushed his chin. I take it holding back does not come naturally to you. Not really, Izuku admitted. Well, depends on the people. I'm pretty harsh when training with my friends. I fear they might pay for it later if I'm not, but I haven't hurt them any more than could be easily treated, usually. Izuku looked down in shame as memories of his fight with Hitoshi at the sports festival flooded back. I see. If you learn to feel like that any time you harm someone, you'll be well on your way to being a proper hero. Until then, when you train with anyone else, try to imagine they are one of your friends. Okay, Izuku nodded, still somber from the memories. Except the red-headed one. Don't use him as the basis on holding back, or you will kill someone, possibly me. That made Izuku's lips twitch upwards, and the redhead in question wasn't even in the same city. Sure. How had this old man learned to read him so easily already? Talking about the others made Izuku wonder how they were doing. Ijiro practically hopped out of the dressing room in his hero costume. It was still hard to believe he was in an actual hero agency and not just for a tour. He might even get to save someone before the week would be over. Good morning, Mr. Brave. He called out unnecessarily loudly. The pro shook a little and turned quickly, causing light to glint off a large yellow metal mask that covered his eyes and forehead. The rest of his costume mainly consisted of a dark blue bodysuit that he didn't fill with his pretty average build as much as Ijiro had expected of a pro hero. He at least had a red cloth tied around his neck that looked pretty cool, and he could turn his pointy black hair into literal swords. His left chin was almost as black from a large bruise. Ijiro wondered if he should apologize again. It wasn't quite like sparring with Izuku and his dragon blades. Mr. Brave didn't have the heat or muscles to really make Ijiro feel his hits, but he was a pro. He surely had tricks up his sleeve he had not shown to Ijiro yet. At least Ijiro hoped could learn something from the pro to impress his bro. He stopped a few steps from Mr. Brave and raised his hands, already squeezed and hardened into rocky fists. Are we going to train again this morning? Please show me what you can really do. If you go easy on me like yesterday, I won't get better fast enough. Mr. Brave's face tightened, and he turned away rasping.
No.
Yesterday was just testing to determine what you were ready for, to make sure we can make this internship safe. You were quite impressive, and with your quirk, I think you were ready to come along for patrols and other daily jobs. Really? Ijiro asked, ecstatic. Really? Brave said and continued quieter. If you didn't get even a scratch from my quirk, you should be okay, even if you were still a student. His voice sounded strange at the end there, a bit shaky. Ijiro wasn't really sure what it meant. Izuku or Hitoshi would have been better with something like that. Perhaps he was getting sick. Ijiro hoped he would not strain himself for Ijiro's sake. Come on, Brave said. Afterwards, we can try to find you something to punch for training. That isn't me, he ended in a mumble. What did you say? Ijiro asked, catching up to the man. Just thinking for better ways to train you for the internship. Great, thanks. I can't wait. They exited the agency with Ijiro grinning bright enough to make people on the street stop to take a look. Or perhaps it was his costume. I wouldn't do that even if they are heroes. At least you should be careful, a teenage girl told another, barely audible as Ijiro passed them. Didn't you see that video in the news? Hitoshi yawned, walking across the office of an actual hero agency, but behind that yawn there was determination. He was finally living the dream that he had held for most of his life. He had to make it count. First, he had to complete his current mission, the most important task of the day, to make sure he could take full advantage of this opportunity and best help people when given the chance. He reached the coffee maker just in time to catch the last cupful from the pot without having to wait for more to be made. After the first sip he sighed. His shoulders dropped as he felt the warmth flow into him and relax his body. Finally waking up? I better see those lips turning upwards soon. Hitoshi, his eyes finally opening properly, turned around as he raised the cup for a second sip. He decided to respond to Ms. Joke's wish. Now that he had his coffee, it was easier. He just needed to message Izuku that he still got his coffee, and even Izuku could not stop him. Hitoshi huffed at the thought while he smiled. That's the way. Ms. Joke gave him thumbs up. Ready for a day of intensive training? So, it's going to be harder than yesterday? Maybe a bit more actual work, she responded. But I was thinking we would continue the same training. With our non-physical quirks, it is especially important to take our fighting skills beyond that of our enemies. Hitoshi took another sip. So not that intensive. Ms. Joke tilted her head, her smile twisting in confusion. What do you mean not that intensive? I pushed you pretty hard yesterday, even compared to training my second-year class at Ketsubutsu. Perhaps, but I could still walk straight when going to bed, and there was no need for any medical treatment. I didn't even take painkillers to sleep without being brainwashed.
Painkillers?
And what do you mean being brainwashed? You never told me you can use your quirk on yourself. I can't, Hitoshi said, and twisted his smile into a smirk, emphasis on I. He enjoyed having his coffee and watching his pieces started to click in place in Ms. Joke's head. You mean that dash, she paused, snapping her fingers, that white-haired kid who is also in Aizawa's class, is something? The one people called quirk stealer. Hitoshi's stare hardened. It wasn't anywhere near the cold stare of death Izuku could pull off when someone looked at Hitoshi wrong, but it delivered the message as Ms. Joke shut up. It's Izuku. Never call him by that ignorant accusation again. Oh, Ms. Joke said, leaning closer with a smirk. Did I hit a sensitive topic? I would not be here without him. Never would have stood a chance at getting into UA without his training, Hitoshi responded, not yielding a bit in what was about to become a staring contest. And we both have lived with the same garbage from people because of our quirks. We actually first met when he got pissed at people doing that to me. Oh. I would also be dead couple of times over without him. Ms. Joke gave up on the staring contest, and her smirk disappeared. Really? Hitoshi nodded slowly, wondering if he should have shut up earlier. Then again, Izuku's reputation was still undeservedly horrible, and every person that could see past that would be a win. He smiled over his cup. Really? There is reason my training has been so intense. I think he is afraid at going too easy on us and regretting it later. Considering what happened at USJ, he seems to be right to do so. Hitoshi stared into the coffee and decided what he had said was enough without delving deeper into his feelings and concerns. I see. I guess trusting your quirk with him isn't such a big deal to you then. He has had your quirk, right? Several times, Hitoshi responded. It's not bad as long as I don't tense or resist the transfer, which is easy since that is when I get my best sleep even after training together. When I wake up, my quirk is back. Sounds like you were close. Hitoshi gulped down the rest of his first cup. And that I can afford to turn your training up a notch from what I was planning. Her devious grin might have scared Hitoshi a few months earlier, but now he was just staring neutrally over his cup, wondering if he'd learn anything to show off during the next weekend's boot camp. He was sure the others would. Sometimes it felt like he existed in a manga in which a week of special training could mean all the difference, especially for a stubborn training fanatic, and Hitoshi knew a couple of those. And after that you can tell me more about how my Aizawa is doing, and don't even try to pretend you wouldn't know I'm not going to buy it when you are wearing that." She pointed at the capture weapon Hitoshi had around his neck like Mr. Aizawa did. He was already starting to regret doing that. Not like he could really use it in a fight properly yet, but it felt right. "Finish your coffee. Today, I'll show you some moves on how to quickly take down people one by one while defending yourself from others. With our kinds of quirks, that is essential." At least he had found a hero who could understand his position in a fight. Even if her training was soft compared to Izuku's, she might still have something to offer Hitoshi. "Ms. Joke," one of the agency sidekicks called, coming into the room. He was not bringing good news. That much was obvious on his face. "Have you seen the news?" Tokoyami walked around the agency with Dark Shadow peeking around corners ahead of him. All the quirk found was a young hero whose name Tokoyami didn't yet know that Dark Shadow caught by surprise. "Hey, have you seen that Hawks guy?" Dark Shadow asked. "He was supposed to teach Fumi." "Oh," the young hero said, staring at Dark Shadow for another long moment before seeing Tokoyami. "Ah, you were that new intern. Hawks flew off a moment ago. Something about a sudden meeting, Hero Safety Commission, or something." They stood in silence for a moment. "Sue," the young hero continued, "you could probably go to the training center to train while waiting for him. I'll tell someone you were there. That is probably best under these dim conditions. I hope what Hawks is dealing with does not take too long. He already spent yesterday flying away from us," Dark Shadow added. "We almost flew into a wall trying to fly after him." "Heh, well, sorry to tell you, but you are probably going to have more of that. He usually stays on the move." If Tokoyami had a regular mouth instead of a beak, he would have frowned. Well, at least he was getting extra training at Midoriya's place, so he might not fall behind most of the class. Shoto stepped out of the office building that was home for the agency where his internship took place. It wasn't a large place, nothing like when he had been made to visit Endeavor's agency for Endeavor to show him off. The building wasn't the agency was in the building. Even the training grounds were just slightly larger than an average yard inside the city block, with outside gym equipment next to the building and concrete and ground barriers lining 3 sides of the yard for safety. With any luck, it was a small enough place to stay off Endeavor's radar. Right now, there was only one person in the yard. From a distance, the short man, barely taller than Shoto, seemed unassuming. Shoto's first meeting with the younger-looking 30-something man had left Shoto in shame, remembering Izuku's words about looking down on people based on how he viewed their strength. Also, getting closer to the man, some of that impression was lost. His hero costume was simply a martial arts GI, much like Ojiro's hero costume at school but light blue like a lightning, and that GI being sleeveless had quickly put cracks on the weak impression. The man might have been short and lean, but he was also what an ancient Greek sculptor would have sculpted if asked for a statue of a martial artist. It was easy to recognize Thunder as a pro-hero up close. Shoto stopped a few steps away from him, settled on his knees, and waited quietly. He wasn't sure if he was okay acting submissive like that. People called it respect, but was that just what those in charge taught him? He didn't want to cause trouble with everything going on, and Thunder hadn't been bad to him, so he went along with the custom, but occasionally wondered what Izuku would do. "How did you sleep?" Thunder asked. "Normally," Shoto responded quietly. He was mostly honest. This kind of restless sleep had been normal for him before the sports festival, and last night had not been much worse. He survived then. He would survive through this week. He only had to survive the week. Still not very talkative? How was Shoto supposed to answer that? He knew he didn't talk as much as others, but he didn't have much to say. Maybe it was okay to admit to that, but what if he said it wrong and the man got angry? Saying the wrong thing had meant suffering so many times before, at least when he wasn't talking to someone weak. Then again, everyone he felt like talking to even when he didn't have to would not be afraid to talk back, even to someone strong, or especially someone strong, at least in Izuku's case. The silence was becoming threatening itself. What was the man in front of him thinking? "I don't have much to say," he finally said. "Are we going for a patrol again?" "Perhaps later. You might have been able to catch some practical experience yesterday, but that patrol was meant to introduce you to practical hero work and to get to know you. I am supposed to also train you, not just walk around with you." Thunder walked away from Shoto, who stayed put on his knees. Get up! Thunder turned around to face Shoto, who obeyed. You have great power, even greater than my own despite your age, but your use of it is not honed. You rely too much not only on your quirk, but applying it with overwhelming power. Do you see that? Shoto lowered his head. Yes, that has been told to me recently. Recently? So not by your father? No, never, Shoto said, his tone turning harsher but also tenser. I was warned to not discuss or contact him, not just by your teacher but a whole group of people from some law firm that made some serious threats. I'm sorry, Shoto said before he had the chance to ask himself, what would Izuku do? Why are you apologizing? I saw how the sports festival ended. Seems there is something behind that request. Shoto stayed quiet. He wasn't sure if that was right. Talking to others had helped, but it was also trouble for them, and he did not know how this man would react. What if he took Endeavor's side? Maybe he would already have called the man without Aizawa and Izuku knowing. What if he did? Thunder glanced up at the clear sky. Did it just get colder? He paused as his attention moved back to Shoto. His voice got more serious. I see. He took a few steps away, and then just waited. They stood there for a long moment before he even spoke again. Focus on controlling your breathing. It is the mirror of your feelings, but can also control them if you can control your breath. Draw air in slowly as long as you can. He continued talking to Shoto about breathing, and eventually Shoto found himself following the instructions. His breathing eased, and the temperature around him evened out to normal. The frost around his feet disappeared.
Sure.
Shoto started, but Thunder raised his hand, silencing him. Don't. There are clearly things I should not poke, but you don't need to apologize for it. I should have heeded the warning. Shoto gave a slight, quick nod. That said, there is something that has always helped me with all stress, anger, and anxiety. Is it intensive training? Shoto said to the surprised man. Yes. How did you know? I think I know someone who does the same. He is always training. Shoto brushed his chin and muttered, Should I be worried for that? I don't know enough about that person to comment on it. Right now all I can do is help you. We were talking about the style you use your power with. He spread his arms, expressing how open and vulnerable he was. Attack me. Are you sure? Yes, just make sure to keep it in the yard. If that poses you any difficulty, you are not ready to use your quirk out on the street. I understand, Shoto responded and crouched, ready for a fight. Suddenly his legs spun, and a line of ice launched along the ground at a high speed. Thunder lowered into a better fighting stance, but he didn't even hold his hands in fists. The ice was barely a meter away as it sprung upwards from the ground. It passed Thunder, who was now a bit to the side of the ice, looking at Shoto with a stupid expression, holding his mouth looking like an O. Shoto frowned, but Thunder wasn't the first person to avoid his ice. It was rare, but had happened. Shoto instantly twisted his leg, changing the direction of the ice. But his feet weren't touching the ground anymore. Air blew out of his lungs as a much larger volume of air hit him with enough force to push him in the air. Suddenly, the air current changed direction, hitting him in the back. Thunder was in front of him. Shoto raised his hands in defense, but he rarely needed to fight hand-to-hand, except when Izuku banned him from using his quirk. Shoto's arm got twisted behind his back, and he was pressed against the ground. Worse than I thought, Thunder said, and twisted Shoto's arm a bit more while holding his head down and pressing a knee on his back. Trapped, Shoto breathed faster, trying to release more ice to not be at the man's mercy, but his heat also tried to burst out and slowed him down. He was quite literally shaking. Thunder's hold eased. Now I know you could use your quirk to get out of this. Probably could have turned me into ash by now. Might have burned my hand already. But remember two things. First, that is the most horrible way to die, and as a hero your job is not to burn people to death, or to freeze them to death under a glacier, for that matter. Shoto gasped and managed to calm down a bit. He tried to imagine he was held down by Ijiro or Izuku. Izuku would be more likely to give a lecture. Either way felt safer, and the pro-hero was now even holding him down more gently than those two. Second, if I was a villain, I too would have had time to do something much worse than hold you down before you recovered from the initial shock. Best way to get away from the enemy is to not be caught by them. To do that, you must be able to stay mobile, not just stand there thinking your quirk will stop everything. I didn't warn you against relying on it just from principle. You cannot freeze or burn every problem in this world, but if you rely on your power too much, you might think you can. He released Shoto, and his weight left Shoto's back. The man's voice had quieted a bit. And that day you will not be a hero. I don't even know if I will be one, Shoto muttered as he stood up. What did you say? Thunder asked, his voice suddenly sharper. Nothing, Shoto responded, looking down. I don't think so. Thunder reached for Shoto's shoulder, but Shoto jolted and the man thankfully withdrew. Thunder looked at him for a short moment, then turned around, nodding to himself thoughtfully. I want to ask why you would say that, but I sense it would not be smart. I am sure you have reasons for your feelings. You will eventually come up with the answer. Maybe. I don't know. Thunder looked at Shoto over his shoulder. Do you want to save and help people? Ah, yes. Then think what lets you do that best, and you know what your choice is. Izuku might have said something similar, but did helping mean being a hero? Hey, Thunder. Another hero called out from the door. There's something you'll want to see. Chapter 65. Monsters Meet. Stain crouched on a rooftop alone, hiding amongst some air conditioning units. People rarely looked up, but the sun was still only going down. Being out like this was dangerous. He probably should not have done it, but he would not have time at night. He should have ignored that kid's insistent requests. After spending several nights with him, it was clear the masked Shigaraki, despite his surprising skill, was a kid in his late teens at most, which was why Stain himself was confused why he had agreed to the kid's request or spent his time on the kid. He gave Stain a rare training opportunity and had put up a better fight than the killer was willing to admit. If he utilized all the unknown quirks he somehow possessed, the kid might have been a true threat even to the killer of pro heroes. But did he really have a conviction worthy of spending time on? When the kid stood in his way and spoke about sparing the fakes to expose them, even questioning Stain's judgment on their worth, Stain could not judge him as anything but naive. Yet his insistence on correcting society without clear personal gain and apparent unwillingness to risk making anyone but the worst suffer was something special. If he had pursued the path of a hero, he might have become a real one, if the world did not kill his naivete first. Yet he had chosen to be associated with this league of villains. Perhaps this meeting would give some answers to that question. That might make this somewhat worthwhile. Stain's instincts honed by blood flared. He spun around, holding up a katana, only to face one of those dark portals that looked like black mist spinning around. The creature, because that was not just a person with a quirk, responsible for it, materialized next to the portal. For some reason, he was always dressed like a bartender. As Stain stepped through the portal, he got an answer to that mystery, at least as he arrived in some kind of private bar, and the misty creep moved behind the bar counter. He wasn't the main creep in the room, though. Seeing Tamura Shigaraki in person and meeting his stare only reinforced Stain's expectations. So, you are the famous Stain who has everyone talking about him after killing a couple of random heroes, Shigaraki said with a sneer. And you are Tamura the lesser Shigaraki? Stain responded without changing his facial expression, not even when he saw barely contained rage boiling in Shigaraki's eyes while he did his best to scratch the skin of his neck away. So what do you want from me? Stain asked. Talk quickly. I don't feel like wasting much time on you. Tashinori Yagi, also known as the #1 hero All Might, stepped into a room at the school where his visitor was already waiting. The man slightly shorter than Tashinori, even in his small form, was just putting away his long beige jacket and hat that made him look as stereotypical detective as possible. Good to see you, Tsukachi, Tashinori greeted and placed a cup of tea on the table for his friend before they both sat down. I'm sorry to show up unexpectedly. Hope you don't mind. Please. It is always a pleasure to see you, Tsukachi. So, how's the investigation? Or I should probably say the investigations. Yes, I just hope they are not connected, Tsukachi responded. Both their stares tensed. There were a number of villains that attacked USJ, but there is one we are puzzled by, the one you fought that escaped, the one called Nomu. Ah, that strong bird guy. Yes, thankfully we got some samples before it was freed by the unknown villain. We ran some tests on the Nomu's DNA. What exactly did you find? First, we are not asking you to help us with the case, Tsukachi noted. Technically, this is a leak. I just felt I owed it to you to let you know. It could lead us to the one in charge. Tsukachi hesitated for a few seconds, unintentionally raising the tension of the moment. He nodded his understanding, so the investigator continued. After several attempts at interrogation, we realized that the Nomu can't speak. It shows no reaction to anything. It's as though he literally can't think for himself, no matter what's going on around him. As for his identity, we discovered that he used to be a low-level thug with a record of assault and extortion. Why do you think this will lead us to the mastermind behind the League? Here's where it gets interesting, and unfortunately not for the first time in this manner. Our reports show that he has been altered drastically. When we analyzed his genetic makeup, we discovered 4 different people's DNA. Toshinori held his fist against his chin in thought. Somebody made this guy? Is it even human anymore? The transformation is a result of drugs and other unknown methods. To oversimplify a bit, he's been modified so that his body is able to hold multiple quirks at once. His brain's apparent lack of processing power probably comes from the burden that causes, but we are more concerned about his DNA. He shouldn't have more than one power. Even if new DNA is introduced, that shouldn't give a person multiple powers, not unless it is completely integrated into someone's genome, if even then. Tsukachi paused while a new pressure started squeezing Toshinori's throat and remaining lung. Not all quirks work like one for all, but maybe there is someone out there with a power to pass different quirks onto other people. Sound familiar? Toshinori bounced up on his feet. It can't be. Given the evidence, I think it is a reasonable conclusion, which is why I came. I had to let you know immediately. Tsukachi paused for a moment. There are only 2 people we have ever known to live that fit the description. Midoriya is too young and, as far as we know, has had his quirk too short of a time to have developed something like this. Toshinori stepped in front of the window, looking at the sundown as he grew into all might. No, it is not possible. Don't tell me he is back again. Given that the man who released the Nomu also appeared to have multiple quirks, I would be surprised if you had not already considered it a possibility, unless you shared Death Arm's view on the matter. All Might shook his head and held his face in frustration. Tell me you have found something about him, the masked man? Not much. In our investigation of USJ and interrogations of villains captured, there were several mentions of a masked man dressed in black, who sometimes was with Tamura Shigaraki, in case his involvement with the League was in doubt. We did get a name though, Shirakuro Shigaraki. He is, they at least think he is, the brother of Tamura Shigaraki. And he has multiple quirks. Based on the hospital attack, yes, but you are the one who was there. He also appears to have maintained his human form and mental faculties despite that fact. Those who met him considered him more intelligent, or at least more stable than Tamura, but his presence seems to have been very limited. Also, no one has seen his face. Some of my colleagues think he also has some modifications like the Nomu. You don't sound convinced? Tsukachi shrugged. It is a possibility, but that's all it is. I don't like to speculate on such flimsy basis. It is not so unusual for villains to hide their face that we'd need such explanation. I am more worried for what his existence means. The Nomu was massively powerful, but completely dependent on others to control it. If the League can give a person multiple quirks without the side effects that it suffered, we already know they can if he is behind them. Young Midoriya has proven it is possible to give someone at least a second quirk without significant consequences. Even more might be possible depending on person and the quirks. If our enemies can also tamper with people's DNA, there is no telling what they could do. Yes, he is the other question, Tsukachi muttered. All Might knew what he meant. Have you found out anything more about him? He asked the detective. Not really. Only suspicious thing is how hard it is to find out about his father. Despite everything that has happened, I have never seen the man. To be honest, since I didn't detect any lies talking to him, and with everything else on my desk, I haven't seriously investigated him for a while now. Legally speaking, continuing it would be questionable anyway. The kid might be extremely dangerous if you poke the wrong person, enough to be a concern, but he has not done anything truly wrong. True. Also, He is already hostile to us, you especially. Now that is even more of a problem. If our enemy really is all for one, the kid could be our greatest trump card, especially considering your condition. Tsukachi fell quiet for a moment, grimacing before he continued. I hate to ask, but have you considered the question of your successor recently? I have, All Might responded and shrunk back into Tashinori. There are a couple of options. The principal has his recommendation, and I was already thinking about choosing him, but ever since I started teaching I have gotten a new view on the potential of the younger generation. Wasn't that the whole point? Yes, but now I have more than one candidate, even more than one that can bring joy and a smile to people even in crisis. Tashinori held his head. Before I did not have any candidates I could consider, so it was a relief when I found someone who seemed to be a great choice, but I hesitated giving up one for all. Now I have very promising people practically falling on my lap and I cannot choose. What if I make the wrong choice? It is a big decision. With One for All's power, you are basically choosing the next symbol of peace, assuming you choose well. I have fought crime for decades, but this choice is the single heaviest burden I have carried. Tashinori huffed and smiled. I guess young Midoriya managed to cause me problems even when he decided to tolerate me. Why do you say that? Tsukachi raised one eyebrow. He has strong opinions of both myself and many heroes in general, so I asked what he thinks a real hero is, or more exactly who. I was hoping it would make him consider his views and standards from a new point of view, maybe start softening his harshest opinions, but he only gave me more to think about. Like there is a difference between I am here and everything will be okay. Okay. Tsukachi stretched the word, clearly confused. Anything else? Tashinori thought about it for a moment. Sorry, he eventually said. I know you already have your hands full, but before I can choose, I need to know everything possible about one other person, discreetly. Investigation of concerning individual, or background check before making someone the #1 hero? The latter, maybe. I don't know yet. Izuku's phone rang with the alarm he had set to make sure he would wake up from his forced nap. For a few seconds he was groggy, like a sleep-deprived person forced to wake far too early as he reached for the phone, but then the sleep-deprived caught up. He picked up the phone and renamed the chat Hitoshi had renamed to Izu's nappy time. Now it was just wait for the weekend, as a warning to the brainwasher. Perhaps Gran Torino would know some exercises Izuku had not thought of yet. Good morning. Ijiro soon sent a message, and unlike with Hitoshi, there was no doubt about how genuine the greeting was. I want to see the miracle maker that actually convinced him to sleep, Hitoshi added after Izuku got up and started putting his costume on. I'm not that bad. Izuku responded. How many full nights have you slept after getting that quirk? Izuku put the phone aside to finish dressing. That was a discussion he would not win, and he had watched enough movies, especially in the past months, to know that sometimes the only winning move was to not play. He only looked at the discussion again once he left the room and Hitoshi had given up on getting a response. Have you already seen the video that's been in the news the whole day? Hitoshi asked. Yes, such darkness of the soul. Tokoyami even wrote as he spoke. Izuku frowned a little, thinking several times about what to write. He had a lot to say, but much of it was Shirakuro's words, or at least things that were too tied to Shirakuro. It can't be true, can it? That's so not manly, especially for a hero. Ijiro was still quite naive. Then again, he was too good for this dark world anyway. Izuku finally typed a short response. I'm not surprised. Really? Ijiro asked. I mean, I know you can be pessimistic about how things are, but... He never finished the sentence before sending the message. The little picture, half of it red, and text at the bottom of the screen just said, Red Riot is writing. With so many protections and privileges for heroes, stuff like that is inevitable as long as they think they won't get caught or held responsible, Izuku responded. And no one is even seriously trying to filter them out. Remember how egomaniacal almost murderer got into UA? I guess you were right. I heard some heroes talking about it. They sounded more worried about how people reacted to what he has done than what he did. Perhaps not as naive as Izuku feared. That's how they get away with it, Izuku responded. I would be careful if you meet heroes from his agency. I think I already did. They are the ones I met. Still, it is hard to believe. How could he? Heroes are supposed to save people, not what he did. There was a short break between messages. Could it be fake? As much as Izuku wanted to confirm everything, he had to send Shirakuro to sit in the corner and shut up. Could be, but some news titles said there was more than just the video. You mean the records about his arrests from some hero sites that alleged things happened after being arrested? And apparently several of them are doing it again now, Izuku added. Hitoshi was already writing by the time he sent the message. Some people must be as nerdy about heroes as you are about quirks to keep up those sites. Ever thought about replacing notebooks with a website? Count on Hitoshi to ease the tension. Izuku typed a quick snarky response. I'll put you on the front page if I do. Another sales pitch? Wasn't the sports festival enough? Not that I have reason to complain. Even though Izuku's eyes were on the screen, his ears were still working. He ducked at the last fraction of a second, so a wrinkled hand flew past empty air where his head had been. Gran Torino bounced off a wall and landed in front of Izuku, who barely stopped himself from launching a counterattack. Have to say, never met someone as vigilant, the old man said, especially from your generation. Usually people with their faces on screens wouldn't notice if I parked a car right in front of them. Those people would not reach your age if they tried to be heroes, at least real ones, Izuku muttered while reading the messages. Can you add me on there too? Ijiro asked. Didn't he already make a sales pitch of you to a **M**********? At least the censoring Izuku had added to his chat worked. Oh yeah, maybe not that much. Yes, that much at least, Izuku wrote. But I'm not starting a website. I want to choose who gets my notes. Dark Shadow wants to know what you have written about him. Living room, third shelf from the floor. The one with a black back and a picture of Black Raven on the cover. You already have individual notebooks for each of us? Hitoshi asked. Had to sort out notes from other notebooks. Yours is the one with a purple back and a picture of a sleepy puppeteer holding strings. Sure. Do you have one for yourself? What does it look like? Hitoshi asked. There were two actually, one black, one white. Neither were on the living room shelves.
I'm Gran Torino Koft.
Izuku did not mind. GDGTTYL. Izuku put the phone away. Finally. Got your attention now? For now, Izuku responded. Fine. It is time you get some of that real experience. We are going out to fight some villains. Gran Torino turned and started heading to the door. I've already called a taxi to head to the station. Station? It won't do us any good hanging around here. Because of the small population in this area, the crime rate is pretty low. That's why there are so many hero agencies in urban areas. There is a lot more crime there. They got into the waiting car. The higher the population density, the more trouble you'll find. In Shibuya, you'll have a bunch of small fights to break up, I guarantee. Izuku brushed his chin, staring at the backrest of the driver's seat. We are going to Shibuya in Tokyo. Are we going to take the bullet train towards Shinjuku? Yep. So we are passing Hosu City, Izuku muttered and finally turned to face the old man. Wouldn't it make more sense to stop there? It is plenty urban, and we wouldn't need to spend so much traveling. Gran Torino looked at him for several seconds, long enough to understand he had seen past Izuku's excuses. The old man frowned, confirming that. Why are you so interested in Hosu? I just told you. No, I don't think so. As for why, Hosu is where the hero killer just struck twice. Izuku must have shown something on his face because Gran Torino's frown deepened. Don't tell me you were thinking about him? He accused. Izuku grimaced. No, not directly. I have a classmate who is interning with Manuel in Hosu. You are worried, Gran Torino interrupted. Don't try to pretend. It has been obvious from the beginning. So, he is with pros, and his safety is not your responsibility. Izuku begged to differ, but remained silent. Yours is mine. Also, with increased hero presence looking for the killer, there are less opportunities to deal with small-time crime. We are going to Shibuya. Izuku frowned, and might have given an angrier stare than was smart. No complaints or I will take away your phone. Izuku turned away, resisting the urge to huff or comment how he'd like to see the old man try. Shirakuro could have kept a better eye on Tenya at this point, but here he was. He opened his chat again. Going to be in Shibuya looking for trouble tonight. Don't hurt the criminals too much. Hitoshi wrote almost instantly. I'll try my best. Hitoshi is writing. Don't even think about it. Izuku commanded. Do or do not, there is no try. He did think about it. Thunder talked about that today, not hurting villains too much. Shoto commented for the first time in a long while. Izuku could practically hear the quiet monotone voice in the words. Unfortunately, that did not tell him enough about how the other was doing. That's good. It reminded me of how bad fire can be. So maybe not that good. Izuku had his work cut out for him. He rubbed his forehead and might have sighed too loudly. I'm not going to change my mind, Gran Torino remarked. It's not that. This is. You saw the end of the sports festival with Shoto, Todoroki, and Endeavor? Whose son you effectively kidnapped. Saved. Endeavor is worse than All Might. Izuku paused briefly. Do you have any experience in dealing with trauma? Mental trauma specifically? Gran Torino leaned his head on his cane with a more serious stare on his face. Mostly from having trauma. It is part of the job, especially if you go after the big fish or serious accidents. What if the fish was your father? I see what you are getting at. What does he want? The boy, I mean. Shoto, Izuku corrected. Izuku hesitated before continuing. Talking about this to an outsider felt wrong. But what if the old man had experience that could help Shoto? He's scared. He might look confident and arrogant or seem cold when he gets his act on. But as soon as it breaks, if anyone even mentions Endeavor, he has had issues with controlling his quirk, and there have been several times when he basically tried to hide behind Ijiro, the redhead with thick skin. My memory isn't that bad. Does he do the same with you? Yes. Izuku tilted his head back and forth. If I'm not going towards whoever made him afraid. So, proactive approach or aggressive, Gran Torino muttered. Whatever you have done, you have clearly earned his trust. Same with your friend. That is the most important part to help someone with trauma. Don't break that trust, or he might sink even deeper into whatever he is stuck in. Izuku's face twitched, and he looked out of the window before exposing any feelings he shouldn't. Break their trust? How long could he keep his charade up? He closed his eyes. It was better to focus on what was right in front of him now. Shoto was okay. Just a regular internship in a less-known agency. As for Tenya, if Stain was going to strike, his target would not be manual, most likely, and he would wait to get his target alone, probably, and Shibuya was at least closer. Perhaps getting a shot at some smaller-time criminals was just the stress relief Izuku needed. At that moment, every thug, thief, and troublemaker in Shibuya had a cold shiver run through them. So you want me to be a part of your grumbling little league, Stain said, but you won't accomplish anything if you don't have conviction and desire. Without those, you will always be an aimless weakling achieving nothing, even more so than the other Shigaraki. That's how you got here. He was holding a blade in each hand, one of them piercing the shoulder of Tamura Shigaraki as he crouched over the creep he had brought to the ground. Hey now, you are being a little rough, aren't you? Tamura Shigaraki said from behind the hand placed on the creep's face. Kurogyri, take this guy back. He was truly thinking he could decide if Stain left. I'm sorry, I can't move, the misty creep said, pain apparent in his voice. It is the hero killer's quirk at work. I am sorry. Even knowing about it, I was too slow. Young Shigaraki will be angry. Well, at least there is that, Tamura Shigaraki muttered, sounding almost satisfied, like he did not have a sword in his shoulder and serial killer crouched over him. The word hero has lost all meaning in this society, Stain declared. Whether they lived or died here, they would know his conviction. The world is overrun by fakes and criminals like you who chase petty dreams. They must all be purged. That hand on the creep Shigaraki's face started annoying Stain as he stared at Tamura Shigaraki, so he brought his free sword to swipe it away so he could see his potential prey. What to do with this Shigaraki? Stain felt no interest, not even the little he had for the other Shigaraki, for the training opportunity he offered. Tamura Shigaraki's hand suddenly moved, faster than Stain expected based on their initial confrontation. It grabbed the actual blade of the sword. What do you think you are doing? If you touch this palm, The metal around his fingers cracked. "I'll kill you." The metal continued cracking and shedding its surface in the creep's grasp. Stain had gotten careless and tensed as he met Tamura Shigaraki's stare behind the blade, but he did not fear or show surprise. He had heard about Tamura Shigaraki's quirk having something to do with touch, and if he had learned one thing from the other Shigaraki, it was to always expect surprise quirks, especially with this lot. "You sure talk a lot, hero killer." Conviction. Maybe I don't have anything as loaded as that. If I had to choose a desire, though, yeah, it would be killing All Might. If this world wants to worship trash like him, I'll destroy their beloved symbol of peace and then crush them while they are in shock. The blade of the sword was lost, and Tamura Shigaraki swung his hand at Stain. The attack was easy to avoid, but in doing so Stain had to jump away from him, allowing the creep to get back up. The last of my injuries were finally about to finish healing, and now this. He held his wounded arm in front of him, though despite his complaints the injury and pain did not seem to hold him back. The injury also did not heal as Stain had suspected it might. That was useful to know. You should learn to not play with knives. The other was compulsively scratching his neck. "We don't have a healer in our party, you know. I see your nature. It seems our goals fundamentally oppose each other. However, this wasn't in vain. We both agree that we need to destroy the present, or we three, all in different ways." The stare in Tamura Shigaraki's visible eye changed suddenly, and the scratching intensified. "I'm over this, leave," he said in a frustrated, but now far less commanding and arrogant tone. "Drop dead. I'm the kind of person you hate most, right?" "I was testing your motives," Stain said, putting his remaining blade away. "People always show their true colors when on the verge of death. It is abnormal, but there is desire, a warped shroud of conviction inside of you. How will it plume in the end, I wonder?" Stain thought for a moment, speaking the next words in a lower muttering. "One has clear conviction, but is held back from doing what is necessary. The other lacks direction, but may do anything for his desires." Stain smirked and held his arms open, seemingly open and vulnerable to attack. "Seemingly. Maybe I let you grow. See which Shigaraki has a stronger conviction." Tamura Shigaraki's stare hardened again, if that was even possible. He seemed to care more about the comparison between the two Shigarakis than his so-called desire. Perhaps he truly cared about nothing but himself. If that was the case, "If you don't turn out well, I'll take care of you later." "You think you could get rid of me?" Tamura Shigaraki said, the arrogance returning, as the misty creep was freed from Stain's quirk. "Kurogyri, someone as crazy as this would be nothing but a problem for the League of Villains. Please reconsider. This man will be a great asset if he joins us." "I'd say this was a success. My business here is done. Now you will return me to Hosu. There are still several false heroes for me to attend to there," Stain said and licked his lip. He still had the taste of the misty creep's blood in his mouth. He had never tasted blood like that. The misty creep moved away from behind the bar counter, stepping between Stain and Tamura Shigaraki. A new large warp gate opened between them. Stain stopped and tilted his head to give the misty creep a stare. "How do I know this leads to where it is supposed to, and not somewhere high in the air or in a cell? I was instructed to send you back, not to send you to your death. And you weren't given other instructions before?"
No.
Stain thought for a moment and looked at Tamura Shigaraki. "You first." The creep stared at Stain, thinking about killing him, but then the stare changed as if he had thought of something. "Fine, if it gets you out of here." Tamura Shigaraki stepped into the mist, and Stain followed immediately to make sure the misty creep could not change the destination. They arrived safely on the same rooftop the misty creep had met him earlier, on top of a water container to be exact. Stain crouched on the edge. "Hosu City looks nicer than I expected. So, what are you going to do?" "I will reform it. In order to do so, blood must spill. You have a clear goal. Your dedication is admirable," the misty creep said. "Finally someone who understands," Stain muttered. "We have understood for a long time. Young Shigaraki took great interest in what drives you. Even if the path you believe to lead to the end you seek is not as clear as you think, do not try to convince me to abandon my conviction. You should follow the news." "Kurogyri, be quiet," Tamura Shigaraki barked. For once Stain agreed with him. I do not care about anyone in the news. Hero is a title for those who have accomplished great deeds without personal gain, nothing less. This city is full of false champions. All they care about is money and fame. Until this world realizes its mistakes, I will continue my work. Stain had had enough of talking. He drew his blade and jumped down from the water container. The sun was already behind the horizon, and tonight Stain was going to hunt. He glanced back at Tamura Shigaraki looking down at him from the top of the tank. The creep was planning something. After Stain was out of sight, he pulled out a phone and turned it on for the first time for the day. He did his share of research to catch his prey, but the last day before striking was dedicated to training and preparing for the hunt. There was indeed much more talk about the fake he had purged last than with those that came before. There was a true media circus going on like he had never caused. Stain huffed and turned the phone off again. He had his duty to take care of that he had to focus on,